right, so rentals. One of the reasons that I do like to spend a lot of time talking about the rentals is that for newer agents who are partnered up with your coach and your mentors for that client to close part of your process, the mentors don't actually assist with the rental piece. They're with you on the buys and the sells, but not the rentals. We want you to be able to keep your commission on that. And we can teach you a lot in a classroom setting on rentals. So you can get out and handle those on your own. Your coach can support you on it. However, you don't have to be like in that step-by-step process with your rentals like you do on your buys and your sells. Also, some of the documents are very similar. So we don't have to worry about, learning something completely new when it comes to like the exclusive rights to represent and the listing agreement. One thing I will let all of you know is that even though you're taking this class now, I am hopeful that July 1st, we are going to have changes, significant changes to the rental documents, just as we did for January 1st for the sale documents. So the contract had significant changes. So we are going through piece by piece on these documents, and in the NVAR Forms Committee, we've actually created a subcommittee, which I am the chair of the subcommittee, and we are going through from start to finish. So from the application and the tenant representation agreement, we are going through every single document all the way through the lease and the walkthrough sheets. So Young and Layla, if you have any feedback that you would like to send my way, or any of you that do a lot of rentals, please get me that feedback because we would love it for that committee. So I tell you that because you're going to want to plan to come back through class in July with me for all of these changes. All right, so we will start with our exclusive right to represent tenant agreement. I am not going to spend a ton of time on this document because it is pretty much a mirror of our exclusive right to represent buyer agreement, except it talks about tenants. So this document is signed prior to showing a home to a tenant. I know that there is a lot of pushback in the market from tenants who don't want to sign an agreement. There is more of an opportunity with tenants than with buyers for tenants to be unrepresented, and that's okay. Landlord agents can show and should show prospective tenants a property, and that's when you would have the disclosure of unrepresented parties signed. You wouldn't be entering into a tenant agency agreement with someone if you're representing the landlord. But this document is if you have someone who says, hey, I need to go rent a place and I need an agent to help me, right? It's the same concept as the buyer agency agreement. It's just the duties are a little bit different because you're not looking for a purchase and it's not a buyer, it's a tenant. So it talks about leasing a property instead of purchasing a property. It talks about how the tenant is telling you that they're not under an agency agreement with someone else. The address section is exactly the same. The term section is exactly the same. Just a reminder, in Virginia, if it's blank, it is going to default to 90 days. Okay, so I'm not going to kick back an agreement if it's blank. It's just going to default to 90 days from the date everybody signed it. The duties it talks about, of course, are going to be a little bit different than in your buyer agreement. It talks about how the broker, right, our duties are first, will promote the tenant's interest by performing the terms of the agreement, seeking a lease at the price and terms acceptable to the tenant. We will present in a timely manner all written applications or counteroffers to and from the tenant. We will disclose to the tenant material facts that we know about the property or concerning the transaction that we have actual knowledge of. Okay, so this would be a situation where we know that there's a leak in the property. That's a material fact about the property. We know that the landlord is behind on their mortgage payments. That is a fact that's concerning the transaction. We would have to disclose that to the tenant. We account for in a timely manner all money and property received for which the tenant may have interest. Money is going to be, first month's rent that's paid. I'm just looking in the chat, the first link. So in that link that I sent, Young, all of the document, there should be 5 or 6 documents in that Google Drive. And the one on the bottom should be the rental link. Was everybody able to get the rental documents in that? Yep. Okay. All right. Unless otherwise provided by law, the tenant consents in writing to release certain information. So if we have to release information, we have to release information, right? The broker shall maintain confidentiality of all personal and financial information other than matters identified as confidential by the tenant and information received by the tenant during the brokerage relationship. So what does that mean, right? What that means is that same thing as in the buyer consultation, right? Once they enter into the agreement, then we can't release confidential information to the other side, right? So when you're making an offer, if the tenant can afford a lot more money, but they don't want to pay more money, that's confidential information that we can't release to the other side, right? Once we are in this agreement. If we weren't in the agreement, then that's not confidential information. This also has that paragraph that says that, or the line in the paragraph that says that we as agents can show the same home to different clients, right? Especially in this market when there's such a shortage of inventory, you might end up with clients that want to see the same house. So this is where the paragraph highlights that can happen, okay? The tenant's duties are to work exclusively with the broker, AKA the agent, right? During the term of the agreement, pay the broker directly or indirectly the compensation set forth below. So the indirect is when the landlord agent is offering the compensation, or if it's a for rent by owner, the landlord is offering that compensation. Comply with the reasonable requests for pertinent financial or personal data to fulfill the terms of the agreement. That's filling out the application, right? And be available to work during the broker's regular working hours. This also has that reminder that we're not taking pictures while we're touring, we're not taking extra photos, we're not doing videos without written consent of the landlord side, just like on a listing that's for sale. All right, the purpose here is the same as on your buyer agreement, residential property in Virginia. We keep it broad. We don't want to narrow ourselves down to, a townhouse in Fredericksburg, because then if they wanted to go look at a single family home in Stafford, it wouldn't apply here. Okay, so residential property in Virginia. I have seen agents charge retainer fees on rentals. My personal opinion is that retainer fees are hard to account for and monitor. And in this market, when we have more agents than ever, that are in the business and we're competing for business, that a retainer fee is probably not going to help you to win the deal when you're charging retainer fees. So think about that. But what the retainer fee is when you're collecting an amount of commission up front and it either is or is not subtracted from the commission. So this is like an upfront payment, right? So if they never rent and you never get a commission, then you've covered some of your costs for your time or gas or whatever. So this is where you would mark how much the retainer fee is. It would be paid to the brokerage, and it will or will not be subtracted from compensation. So if it will be subtracted from compensation, that means that they would get it back if the landlord side actually paid the full commission. Okay. Again, I'm not so sure that it's the right market to worry about a retainer fee. Payment. This is exactly like the buyer agreement. We spent a lot of time on that. Tenant shall pay compensation in the amount of blank if tenant enters into a lease for real property. It's copied just from the buyer agreement. So what happens if you put 50% here and the landlord side is paying 25%? Well, your client can write a check to KW United for the other 25%. You can put a flat fee here. You can put 0 and just hope that the other side is paying something. Remember, you put on here what the minimum is that you're willing to work for. Okay, if the landlord side is not offering anything and you put 0, then you have just volunteered your time and hope that you get a referral for a sale from these clients, right? So I do see a lot of the rentals that offer 25, 35, sometimes a flat fee. So you can look in the MLS and see what's being offered in your area and then decide what your fee is going to be. That is completely up to you. And then it has the part where within the certain number of days of the expiration or termination of the agreement, we are due the commission. That's only if they don't enter into an agreement with somebody else. Okay. There's a line here that says, in addition to the broker's fee, an additional blank fee will be collected from tenant, payable to the broker at the time tenant takes possession of the property. So this is like an extra admin fee type thing, right? All right, reload program. Is this person in a reload program? Yes or no? Remember, on sales, there's usually a hefty referral fee on a reload program. We have the dual and designated agency disclosures and consent here. Remember, yes to designated, no to dual. Explain that to your clients ahead of time and what that means. They say no to designated. That means that you can't even show another KW United property. And if you are on the listing side, you can't even have one of your colleagues show your listing. Compliance with fair housing laws. It's just a reminder that we have to comply with all fair housing laws, and it lists out several of them here, but not all. And the reason for that is that as new protected classes are added, then this document wouldn't have to be updated every time. Attorney's fees. This paragraph, this long paragraph, basically says that if somebody is in breach of contract or in default and we have to go after the non-breaching party, attorney's fees will be paid by the prevailing party. So it goes both ways, right? If something happens and the tenant had to sue us and we lost, we would have to pay their attorney's fees. And if we had to sue them and we won, they would have to pay our attorney's fees. So that's what that whole paragraph says. Tenant does or does not hold an active or inactive real estate license. Of course, we always have to disclose the licensee status. And this is the disclaimer on all of our agency documents that talks about how we are only real estate agents and we are not attorneys, tax advisors, lenders, appraisers, surveyors, structural engineers, psychiatrists, Uber drivers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. There's also the service provider referrals that while we're not any of those, we will have the ability to refer some of those professions, and then it's not necessarily an endorsement for their quality, cost, or timeliness of service. All right, other provisions. I don't think there's generally an opportunity to need to write something in other provisions. If there is, and you think there is, reach out to me. We'll talk about how to write it so it says in more enforceable terms what it is that you want it to say. Okay. Down at the bottom, leasing associate contact information, that's you. Supervising broker contact information, that's me. And in DocuSign, remember, you can put in the templates. So all of that can just be auto-filled with a click of a button. All right, that was easy. Who has questions about buyer agency agreement? Is that okay that I went through it pretty fast?
You mean tenant?
Tenant agency agreement. It's just like the buyer agency agreement. That's right. It's so interchangeable because it is really like the same. So thank you, Jackie, for correcting me. All right. Listing agreement is going to be just as fast because it really is almost the same. There are a couple of things with the listing agreement that are obviously specific to landlord. Karen, you say you're still a little unclear on the fees. Okay. Are you able to unmute and ask that question? Elaborate on it a little bit.
I was just a little unclear as far as, is it a percentage or is it like, say the rent is $2,200 a month? Is it a percentage of that? Or is it a fee that you and your agency agrees on? I was just a little unclear on that. As far as like what your fee would be once you have once you get a tenant to sign this agreement.
Yeah, so most of what I see our agents do, if they're on the listing side, most are charging a full month's rent on the listing side and then offering out to the tenant side 25% or 35% of the 1 month's rent to the tenant agent. So if you are having a tenant agency agreement signed, you would put 25% of 1 month's rent as your fee. Just as on the buyer agreement, you might put 1% of sale price or 2% of sale price or 5% of sale price, right? Like whatever your fee is. Or you could put 0 because you're going to take whatever some other third party is offering you. And if they're offering you nothing, then you're willing to work for free, which I don't suggest. But that's up to you. You can also put a flat fee in there. So if you know that your client is looking at properties that are between $2,000 and $2,500, you could put that you are charging $500, and that can just be your fee. Like if that's the first one that you work with, right? You're just going to decide, okay, this makes sense. My fee for rentals is a minimum of $500, right? So everyone you work with, the minimum is $500. If they're offering more than $500, then you get to collect that, right? KW collects more than $500. It says it in the paragraph. If you're working with someone who's only looking at a $1,600 listing or a $1,500 listing, well, what's going to be paid by the listing side is likely less than $500. So the landlord side pays whatever their portion is, and then your client writes a check for the difference because your fee for rentals is $500. So it's completely up to you how you want to handle your fee for rentals. Okay. And you can talk to Allie about that a little bit more in one of your coaching sessions. About, how you want to set that up for your business plan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shannon, it's Gina.
Hi, Gina.
Hey, quick question. I don't know if it's a question, just more of like, is this the way you would handle it? I'm getting referrals for renters specific, interested in specific locations, and I'm requiring they sign, the exclusive right to represent. And if they don't want to sign it, then I just say we can do it for one day and then take it from there and see if we want to go forward. Do you think that's a good practice?
Yes, absolutely. So and we talked about this with the buyer agency agreements as well, when we're just meeting people, absolutely giving them and us that opportunity to see whether it's a good fit, right?
Yep.
Absolutely, for that one day. So I think that's a good reminder that we have to have it signed before we go show homes. And tenants are actually, believe it or not, more hesitant to sign because there are so many agents that'll just go open the door for rentals, right? And it's when they're trying to get paid their commission that they're like, oh, their brokerage tells them, hey, where's your agency agreement? And then they send it to get signed. So it really is important that we have it signed, and absolutely, just for one day. You can also list the properties out, just like, we can do on the buyer agreement, to see whether or not they are reasonable, right, with what they're looking for. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the listing agreement for lease. So this is, again, set up very similar to the sale listing agreement. It just highlights some things that are specific to rentals. Okay, so the appointment of the broker, the premises, address, landlord contact information. In most cases, the landlord won't be living there or will be moving out. So where are they going? Where are we going to mail them? If we have to send notices. The brokerage information you guys have on that information sheet from boot camp last time. Term of the agreement. When does the listing expire? Okay, now this is new. The lease terms. So what are the terms for the lease that are acceptable to your client? This is information that's important for when you input the listing into the MLS and you start advertising. So the landlord instructs the broker to offer the premises for lease for a minimum of blank months and not to exceed blank months. Most frequently, I see a minimum of 12 months and a maximum of 24 months. Okay, so it's either a minimum of a 1-year lease and a maximum of a 2-year lease, or it could be a specific situation where they're okay with a short-term lease. You could do a 3-month lease, and maybe they're overseas, maybe they're stationed overseas and they want a long-term lease. So they want somebody to be in there for 3 years, right? So you can put 36 months. Whatever the case may be that the landlord wants, this is what you put here. And then you put your list price for the monthly rental price of blank, or otherwise agreed upon price at a later date. It's the same, that's the same verbiage in our listing agreement as well. So that's when you do the listing amendment. There's a little caveat here that says the broker doesn't guarantee that we're going to get that price. That's just what we're listing it for. And then it says the premises shall be available for occupancy on blank date. I want to be clear that in practice, it does not make sense if there is a current tenant in the property whose lease expires on the last day of a month, who is moving out that last day of the month, for you to advertise that the property is ready the next day, the first of the following month. There has to be time to get that property for the landlord or the property management company that they are using to prep the property and get it ready for the new tenant. Okay, we have to set expectations when we're talking to our clients. I really think that a week is a short time unless there have been several visits to the property to know what the condition is prior to putting the home on the market. Okay, so set the expectations that it's not lease ends on the 31st and then the 1st is when it's available. Okay. This next section confuses some people. So I just want to summarize it. Okay. If the landlord owns more than 4 properties in the state of Virginia, or is an owner with 10% interest in more than 4 properties in Virginia that are rentals, right? So maybe they own 3 outright and then they are an investor in another property or 2 more properties. So it's 5 and above. They cannot discriminate against tenants that have vouchers. Okay, so that's like the Section 8 program. If they own 4 or less, they can say that they are not accepting Section 8 vouchers. All right. We cannot advertise in the listing that they will not accept Section 8 vouchers or housing vouchers because that will be flagged. There are certain areas that also use our MLS, and so it will get flagged, and that is a problem. But they can say they are not accepting the vouchers as part of the income qualification. Okay. The reason that it is the more than 4 units is because it is considered a business opportunity and that there is not a negative impact on that landlord for having those opportunities with the vouchers. Now, I will say, personally speaking, Don, commercial properties are not included. It's dwelling units, it's residential properties. I will say from personal experience, working with properties that I owned, as well as working with Layla and Young with PPM, I don't understand the stigma against accepting vouchers. The tenants still have to qualify for the property under the regular terms that someone would have to go through in order to qualify for the property. The housing vouchers are paid directly from the government entity that has agreed to pay and subsidize, right? So generally what happens is the entity will pay all or a substantial portion of what the rent is, and then the tenant would have to make up the difference if the program is not paying the full thing. So then the tenant writes a check for their portion, but the government entity pays directly to your landlord or to the property management company. It's pretty much guaranteed money, right? They also would have to pay a security deposit. They still have to maintain the premises, right? There's, anyway, that's my soapbox moment. So have a conversation with your clients about what it really means and that they still have to go through the application process. But if they're not comfortable, they can say that they are not going to consider applications if the income, the source of funds, is from the Section 8 vouchers. Okay. Any questions on that before I move on?
Me again, Gina.
Yes.
So the best way to handle this, I have a Section 8 client right now, is to, you know, to work with her the way I would any other client. And then when she's interested in property, to directly call the agents and ask if they accept it. That's the best way to approach it.
Yes, that is my suggestion, is to go ahead and call first before you're showing,
Mhm.
to see whether the landlord will consider those applications,
Okay, thank you.
so that you're not wasting time. I would also look for properties that are managed by property management companies, because in most cases, those are landlords that are going to consider Section 8, because they might own multiple properties and that's why they have a property management company, or they are educated by their property managers to understand what the Section 8 is.
Shannon, I have a question.
Yes.
So if I represent the landlord and the landlord choose to accept one of the voucher application, right?
Mhm.
And actually it's happened. You know, so what I understand, because it's my first time, so I'm doing now with the landlord and see if it goes through. So if so I need to send an email directly to this lady. That's the one that you know, helped the tenant for the voucher, and she's going to send an inspector. So this is where I understand the steps. So I understand that when the landlord say yes, then we send an email. I don't remember the name of the company, and the UCC also the tenant as well. Then this company send an inspector to view the house, right, and to see if the house has everything, you know, correct based on you know, appliance, electrical, and everything, right? After that, if the inspector say yes, the house is eligible for the voucher, and see if the amount of the voucher is the same of the tenant has, everything good to go. They ask me to send a lease blanked without signature because they want to see the lease. Is this something normal that you know, or is something just this company does?
No, it is normal. And so the property, yes, the property does have to be approved by the housing program, and they are going to verify the rent is customary for the size of the home, and you know, where the home is and those types of things. And they will determine whether or not the tenant can pay the difference, and you know, those types of things. So there is an application process if the property is not already in the program.
Okay.
You know, if it's new to come in the program. But yes, they would want to see the lease. In most cases, we're using the VRLTA lease that's provided by NVAR, and so it's not an issue. There are some companies that have written their own lease, and so they're going to want to verify that there's nothing, you know, out of the ordinary.
Perfect. The last question. Can I, in the meantime that we are doing this process, if the landlord receive another application that is as strongest than this one, because this takes time, right? Until the inspector comes, then they need to see if the house is available and blah, blah, blah. Can the landlord accept also in the meantime another application that is stronger or not?
Yes. Yes. Until the lease is ratified, it's
perfect. Perfect. Sounds good.
They
Thank you
can
so
go
much.
with something else. Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. The next section talks about, will the landlord allow smoking inside the home or on the premises? And will the landlord allow pets? And if so, are there any restrictions? If it's a condo, make sure that you discuss with the landlord any restrictions that the building has, because while the landlord might allow pets, the property owners association might have additional restrictions. So please find out about that. And then if there's deposits that will be required from the tenant, then the landlord would be telling you that here. So again, you know what you are advertising. I see anywhere from 250 to 500 as average pet deposits per pet. If you encounter something that's like $750 or $1,000 per pet, your landlord likely does not want pets. You're going to have an issue at the end of the lease term because they're going to be looking for damage. I would probably just suggest not allowing pets if your landlord wants a deposit that's higher than $500 per pet. All right. Property fixtures and conveyances. This is very similar to what the old listing agreement looked like. I can almost guarantee we're updating this for this go round to make it look like we did on the sale listing agreement, where it's just a checkbox if it's yes instead of the yes or no. So these are all the things that are going to be in the property that will be conveyed to the tenant for use during the lease term. Okay, there are as-is items that can be marked down here, and then a repair deductible. A repair deductible is to be used when there is a home warranty on the property. So this is to be paid directly to the home warranty company when there's a repair that needs to happen. I am going to suggest, in best practice, when you are working with a landlord, talk to them about the expectations on this repair deductible. I do not suggest that a tenant be charged a repair deductible in the first 30 or 60 days of their tenancy, because likely it's not their issue that caused the repair to be needed. It's likely normal wear and tear, age of the item, or something else that just wasn't caught during the turnover. So I would caution on charging that early in the tenancy. Okay. Utilities. What utilities are available in the property? And then, is it included in the rent, or does the tenant have to pay this separately? I will tell you, 80% or higher of the lease listing agreements that I sign have this part right here blank. You guys just aren't filling it out. So it's very important that this information is discussed with your landlords and it is filled out. So the utilities and major systems themselves, this is just like on the regular listing agreement: water, sewer, is there septic, is the hot water, gas, electric, or oil, air conditioning, etc. But here it is important to know whether things are included in the rent. In condos, a lot of the time, the water is included in the condo fee. Sometimes it's sub-metered, so that would be extra. Trash removal and recycling, if it's in an HOA, again, most times it's included in the HOA fee, which is included in the rent. So just please mark here. VRLTA. Is the property subject to the VRLTA? For those of you that have been licensed for a few years, you know that there used to be a choice between the common law and the Virginia Residential Landlord Tenant Act. Okay, so landlords could choose to be subject to common law or subject to VRLTA. If they owned 4 or more properties, they had to be under the VRLTA, and then it changed to, well, in 2020, maybe, it changed so that, or maybe it was 2021, there is no more common law. It's all VRLTA. Every residential property is subject to VRLTA. So there isn't a choice anymore. So this is just stating that everything is subject to that. Okay.
So all of the leases then, beginning then, are the
VRLTA. Yep.
So they
Yep.
can't come up with their own lease.
So if they came up with their own lease, they could. However, anything that was in contradiction with VRLTA rules, VRLTA would supersede.
Okay.
Okay. Broker duties. So this lists out the broker duties, right? In the listing agreement for sale, there's a lot more that are listed just like here. We're going to provide the landlord with services consistent with our standards of practice and competence that are reasonably expected of licensees engaged to do the business of real estate brokerage. This is really important because in rentals, we can actually get in a lot of trouble when landlords want to do things that push way outside of the gray area. Okay, we have had landlords that want to be home when prospective tenants are showing the property because they want to meet all of the prospective tenants. They want to see all of the applications in full before anything gets processed. These are things that cross the line that maybe on the surface don't seem like they're an issue. However, meeting the tenants could be considered fair housing violations if they want to meet them and then they're declined, right? And they're being declined on something other than their application. So we just have to be very careful with those things. Just because a client wants it doesn't mean that we have to accommodate it. And at some point, we may have to end our relationship with the client because we can't accommodate them based on the rules that we are bound by. These items are all very similar to the regular listing agreement as far as providing the offers and counter offers that we will market the property. We will not have to continue to show after we're subject to a ratified lease. We can still show it once we have an application in hand that's being processed, right? We can still show the property. We, as the listing agents, will show prospective tenants the property, okay? And this talks about whether there will be an electronic lockbox and a for rent sign on the property. The next couple of sections are copied exactly from the listing agreement that talk about the on the market date in the MLS. Okay, the listing period. Is it going to go in the MLS within 3 days of execution of this document or on or before a certain date? And then is it going to go in the coming soon status? Is this section down here? Does the landlord authorize the display of the address, unedited comments, automated values, right? That's the section here, same as the listing agreement. Please remember that rentals do fall into the coming soon rules. So as soon as something is being publicly marketed to the public in any way, even a sign in the yard, right? That's public marketing. You have 24 hours to get it into the MLS. And it is a $5,000 fine if you get caught and there is no warning. It is $5,000. It is very expensive, especially on a rental. Here is our representation, disclosure and consent. Yes to designated, no to dual. And then our favorite compensation paragraph. So compensation here, we talked about this before we actually got into the document. I do see a lot of our agents that do 1 month's rent, right? An amount equal to 1 month's rent in the compensation section. And then they're offering the tenant agency compensation as 25, 35%. It can be offered out as a flat fee. It doesn't matter. You can also charge a flat fee. It is up to you in your business practice on how you want to do that, okay? This is a section where a retainer fee would be. Again, I don't think in this market, it's a great idea for the retainer fees. Early termination. I still fill in actual costs in my early termination on listing, any listing agreement, whether it be rental or sale, and I would provide receipts to my clients so that they could reimburse me before the listing is canceled. Reimburse me, meaning they pay the brokerage and then the brokerage would pay you. You can put a flat dollar amount here. You can put a percentage of what the rent would have been. It is up to you. Now the next section is a little bit unique because it talks about what happens if the tenant who has entered into the lease decides to buy it at the end of the lease. So the reason it talks about this is because you are kind of procuring costs on that, right? So if the tenant purchases the premises during the tenant's occupancy or within blank number of days of vacating the premises. So let's say they move out, which doesn't usually happen, but they move out and then the property's vacant and the seller wants to sell and the tenant's like, you know what? I really want that property. So I'm going to buy it. So it's within like 30 or 60 days of them vacating. The landlord is going to pay you a commission. Okay. What is that commission? Well, that's up to you. Generally, somewhere between 1% and 3% is what I see here, because that would be essentially your listing side of the commission if you were to list it, right? Between 1% and 3%. So that's what you would put here. This does not have anything to do with the tenant's agent. The agreement between the tenant and their agent is separate. This is between you and the landlord. Okay. Here is a repeat of confidential information. And then authorization to disclose other applications. So this is just like the disclosure to for other offers on a listing. So are you able to disclose that there are other applications? So I want to talk about this for a second. In this market, I feel that there is a best practice to not process multiple applications at the same time. I think that it is a place that we can get muddy when we are taking multiple people's money and trying to have them bid against each other. And then somebody gets declined and our landlords are not looking necessarily at the highest and best offer. It just can get muddy, okay? My suggestion is that we are talking with our landlords up front and we are setting expectations about how we're going to handle the process when applications come in. If the first application that comes in has all of the criteria that your landlord is looking for and looks good on paper, right? Then my suggestion is you go process that one, right? You can collect the other applications as backups in case something comes in on the processing of that application and the verification that your landlord would not be able to accept them. But I do believe that in rentals especially, there is a lot of room for upset people when it comes to fair housing. And so that is my suggestion on that. Okay, set the expectations up front on how you're going to handle that and not taking people's money unnecessarily.
Shannon, may I ask a question?
Yes.
A lot of times, the applications are required to go through a link.
Mhm.
Do they know that it's coming in one at a time, or if they get multiples at a time? Do these people not get charged unless it's actually processed, or do they get charged anyway?
So when it comes to your tenants
Mhm.
submitting applications, I can't speak for how the other side would handle things. Likely our tenants are not going to be treated the same way, and our tenants are going to be paying the $50 each time.
Okay.
There are some companies that will not take multiples and not take people's money. But for the most part, when it's online, in order to get the application to go through, they do have to pay.
Okay, so this is a best practice for us.
Yes.
Shannon, this is Ron. Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Sorry. You're talking about receiving money from applicants and all. Yesterday, I saw a rental advertised where the listing agent, their remarks mentioned, there were fees to disclose how much those were. I like to know that up front so my clients can plan for that. And then the agent also said that there was an application fee of $20 per pet. What are your thoughts about that? I don't see animals as applicants. It didn't seem much.
I haven't seen application fees on pets before, so
It's a
that's
new one for me
new.
too. I looked at it
Yeah.
again to make sure it said application fee, and it did say, it said, yeah, Jerry's smiling and laughing over there. I see, it said application fee.
I know, previous employment. Come on.
Dog training certifications. I don't know.
Yeah.
So was there a separate application for the pet? Like separate documents that they wanted filled out for the pet?
There was no indication of that. No.
So I guess what I would say on that is, I don't like it. And if there is additional documentation that they are requiring for the pets to be processed, then they might be able to get away with charging that extra money as like processing fee for something, as like a pass-through cost. But in general, that exceeds the allowable cost for application fees. So there has to be something that they are being charged for to process information about that pet in order for them to get away with the increased cost.
And could it be something like they're trying to get information, let's say from a vet or something, to find out exactly what kind of breed it is? Because I know there's breed restrictions, and sometimes people aren't completely honest with, what type, or maybe they may not even know what type of breed their dog is.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be some, I don't know if there's a general database where you can like do a search to see whether, animal control has been called on a specific, pet registration, or, I don't know about that, but there would have to be something that they would be incurring costs for in order to charge them.
Shannon,
Yes, Don.
I've had issues with, last year I had seven sets of renters, and I've had issues with people not returning the application fee. That happened in half of the seven that I had.
So application fees are non-refundable.
Well, but they state that they are, and then they don't do it when it comes down to it.
Yeah, so that's definitely a frustration, because by law, the application fees are non-refundable. So if they're saying they're refundable and then not doing it, somebody made a mistake, right? Like somebody's admin put in that they're non-refundable. So I would say that we should be setting expectations with our tenants, that they should never expect the application fee back.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Shannon, I'm sorry, I have a question, and it's going back to the other paragraph about the buyer having the opportunity to, the tenant considering buying the property. I lost connection when I was gonna ask the question. So in Virginia, is there any particular law or something that gives the tenant the preference or a time frame different than a regular buyer to place an offer or the knowledge the house will go on the market? Because when I did my GC license test, there was a question that said, how many weeks the tenant have the right to place an offer before the house go on the market or something like that. And I didn't know the answer, and I still don't know the answer for that question because it wasn't in the material, and just made me wonder if in DC, Maryland, or Virginia, there is such a thing like that, like anything that gives them a right or the preference.
Yeah, in Virginia, there's not. And what they were referencing in DC is TOPA, which only applies right now in DC for properties that were grandfathered in, that the leases started prior to when the change occurred. And it was several years ago that the change occurred. So there's nothing in Virginia that's a first right of refusal.
Oh, okay, neither Maryland.
Right.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, so I think we were on compliance with fair housing laws. So this just talks about that we have to comply with the fair housing laws again, and the reload program. Are they in a reload program? Condo or property association. This is important because the tenants are bound by the rules of the HOA or condo association. So are we providing the documents with the rules or a link or something to the tenants? Or is the landlord doing it? Who is ordering these documents to provide to the tenant? This is important to know how that is going to work, okay? So is the landlord going to be paying for it? Are we charging the tenant for it? They're responsible, okay? Lead-based paint. So if the property was constructed before 1978, so who knows the answer to whether or not you provide it if it was built in 1978? If it was built in March of 1978, do you provide this form?
No.
No, good job. December 31st, 1977 is the cutoff date. So there is a lead-based paint disclosure form that is available for rentals in the event that it qualifies to need that disclosure, okay? And I have it in our packet. Current liens on the property. Please make sure that these are filled out properly, just on your listing agreements as well. Is there a mortgage or deed of trust on the property? If no, then you skip to D. If there is, the landlord has to tell us, are they current on all of their payments, right? They're not in default. They're not at a risk of foreclosure. So then the tenant is going to have an issue if the property gets foreclosed, right? Are there liens for income taxes? We need to know this. Have they filed for bankruptcy? Again, we need to know this. We need to know that it's clean before we put it on the market. The landlord is not a party to a listing agreement with another broker for sale, exchange, or lease of the premises, right? We're not going to list it for lease if they're already trying to sell it with somebody else. Nobody has the first right of refusal on this property to buy it. We need to know that. The landlord is or is not an active or inactive agent. We have or do not have knowledge of existence, removal, or abandonment of underground storage tanks. And is the property currently tenant occupied? That's important for us to know who's occupying the property, if anyone. So the landlord's going to provide keys for us to access the premises and facilitate showings, right? And that the landlord is going to provide us with the current lease documents. Okay, so if it's currently tenant occupied, we need access to the current lease documents and contact information for the current tenant so that we can make friends with the current tenant so that we can make sure showings occur in a timely fashion and that the tenants do not have the property looking like a bomb went off inside. We want it to show nicely. And sometimes the tenants are angry with the landlord and we can make friends with them so that the showings can occur, okay? Good cop, bad cop. Landlord is still maintaining full responsibility for the premises, right? So if it's vacant, the landlord has to have all the utilities on, maintain the physical condition and security of the property, right? It's not our responsibility. This happens a lot where listing agents on rentals, if the property is vacant, will say to the landlord, oh, don't worry, I'll go check on it for you. Please don't do that. Please don't take that responsibility. Okay? If we have it under the property management company, or if you have a property management company, which some of you might qualify to have a property management company outside of PPM or SGS that's in Falls Church, then that's different, right? It's not just the listing agent that says, oh, I'm going to check on your property. It's a big risk for us to do that. Okay, so the property management companies are doing that, but agents should not be doing that. And of course, the appropriate professional advice, service provider referrals, subsequent offers after application acceptance. We still have to provide all applications even after we have accepted an application, right? So something comes in, landlord's already accepted something, even if a lease has been signed, we still have to provide the information to our clients. Governing law, the RLTA is the governing law from the Commonwealth of Virginia when it comes to leases. Attorney's fees, same thing, same paragraph as before. And leasing associate is you, supervising broker is me, and that is our listing agreement. All right, any other questions about the listing agreement that we did not tackle while we were in the middle of it?
Hi, Shannon. Yes, sorry. I just have a question that I don't know why, for what reason, it doesn't stick in my mind. I'm talking about the repair deductible. Can you please explain to me what that means and how it works? Because I heard that you said it's better to don't put any amount. Understand correct?
In what section?
Repair deductible?
No, in the repair deductible, if they have a home warranty on the home, the repair deductible would be the amount that the home warranty company charges as the deductible when there's a service call.
So in this case, this amount, who should have paid? The tenant, or you think that it's best just to keep like that and the landlord is going to pay?
So the reason that it's on the listing agreement is because it is viewed as a pass-through to the tenant, that the repair deductible is a pass-through to the tenant. My suggestion was to not charge the tenant in the first 30 or 60 days if there is a repair needed, because it's likely a carryover from the previous occupant of the property or wear and tear on the property. And so it's not the tenant's fault that something broke, right? It wasn't the tenant's use of it that caused the need for the repair.
So how do you put on the lease? What do you do, an addendum?
Well, you would put whatever the repair deductible is. So if the repair deductible is $100, then you would put $100 start at day 61 or day 31, right? And so then that would be reflected in the lease.
This is if they have home warranty. If the landlord doesn't have any home warranty, what is the amount that you
Nothing. There is no repair deductible if they don't have a home warranty.
Oh my God. Oh my God. So I was thinking repair deductible is like, let's say there's something that it is has to be, let's say there is something that is broke, right? And to fix the electrician pump, for example, and he said is 350 to fix. So I was understanding that repair deductible, it means that, okay, the tenants pay 100 and the landlord will pay, let's say, the other 250. This is what I was understand, beside the home, the home warranty.
Right, it's only the home warranty. It's the home warranty deductible.
Oh, so if it's something broke, in this case, who is in charge to pay
The landlord.
The landlord? Okay. Thank you.
Did you say the owner, the landlord?
Yes.
The landlord has to pay for everything.
Yep,
And
that's what I
let's
thought.
say if the landlord say, Veronica, I want to rent the house as is. If something, the appliances are like that, can you do that? Can you do like, that the appliances are as is? So if something broke, they need to fix. Can you do that or not?
Well, yes and no, right? I mean, technically a washer and dryer could be as is, because a washer and dryer would not be a requirement for the home to be livable, but there has to be a stove. They have to be able to cook, right? There has to be a refrigerator. There has to be an HVAC system, right? There has to be proper plumbing. So while they could say that it's as is, it's not fully as is.
Yeah, because I received when I represent a tenant that send a lease and says the appliance as is, and it did not then do. So, okay, good. Now I know. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. Other questions about the listing agreement before we move on? Okay. So the next document that I have for you guys is just to show the cybersecurity notice. We went over this in regular boot camp. This is something that is required with our rentals. So it's required with every transaction that we do, the cybersecurity notice. The ABA is not required with rentals, right? The ABA is only required with buyers and sellers, but the cybersecurity is required with everything. So I did include it here to show you. This is the rental lead-based paint disclosure document. So it's very similar to the one with the for the sale, okay? But it talks about tenants and lessors and lessees, landlords and tenants, right? And this is the information sheet that you will find in Command as well. Okay, this is not something that goes as part of the lease. This is a document that it references here. Okay. Awesome. Now we have the rental application.
Question.
Yes.
When you do the lease, is it mandatory that if there is a lead paint disclosure, you need to also give it a booklet EPA? You must, or is an option?
So the EPA booklet should be given if they need the information. It's the pamphlet, Protect Your Home from Lead, right? If they've initialed that they've received it, then they should be given it, or at least a link to it. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
This document is what's required. The booklet itself is not what's required in the lease, but this document is what's required. Okay. And when we get to the lease, we'll talk about it. Okay. All right. Rental application. So caveat is this document will change substantially, whether we get it July 1st or January 1st, I don't know. The other thing with this is there are a lot of companies that have online applications. So your tenant might not be using this document, and that's okay. The information that is asked on this document is the information that your client will need to provide, regardless of what the medium is that they are filling out an application. So my suggestion has always been that when you are doing your tenant consultation and when you are doing your listing consultation, that you review this document. It is very important in the listing or the tenant consultation to review this document before you ever go and show homes, because you are going to learn information about your tenant that you might not otherwise know. And it's a script for you to learn that information, okay? For example, how do you comfortably ask someone how much money they make? How do you comfortably ask someone how their credit is, right? It's not a really easy conversation to have. And you need to know these things before you go take them out to look at properties, because someone who makes $40,000 a year should not be out looking at rentals that are $4,500 a month. They don't qualify. This is not any discrimination based on fair housing. This is simply debt to income ratio, okay? And they will be wasting their money and wasting your time and wasting their time because they just don't qualify. So this is a very good way to talk to them about their script, the items that are on here, okay? It's your script. So the top of this application, again, another fair housing reminder. Why are there so many fair housing reminders? I don't know. Might have something to do with what I said about how this is like the biggest way that we can get into trouble with fair housing, right? It's not buyers and sellers so much as it is rentals. So these reminders are everywhere. The brokerage disclosure, this was really meant for when we were dropping off paper copies of applications, right? You attach your business card to it to say who represents the tenant. Applicant identification type and expiration date. So generally a copy of a driver's license goes with the application to verify the identity of who is submitting the application. Applicant 1 and 2. So let's say it's a large property or a property that you have 4 people that are adults over the age of 18. You just submit 2 different applications, right? It's not a big deal. So applicants 1 and 2, they're offering to lease on a property known as blank. Okay, you can have your clients fill out the application without a property address, without the terms and without the amounts, but they can fill everything else out. And I do suggest that they do that, even if you don't know if they're going to be filling it out online or not. When you give the tenants this information, they're gathering everything that they're going to need to submit the application when you find the right place. So it is not a waste of time. If they're using the NVAR lease, then you're going to fill in the address of the property, how many months or years they're looking to rent, beginning on whatever day, that's their offer, right? And what the rent is that they're offering. In this market, sometimes tenants are offering more money than what the list price is so that they win. A non-refundable processing fee of blank per applicant is included with this application. So that's your application fee, right? Generally $50 per applicant. This says processing may take up to 5 business days to complete. This is to set expectations for everyone that the information that's included in this application has to be verified. And generally there's people on the other end that have to be contacted. And that's why it can take up to 5 business days. An earnest money deposit in the amount of blank is included and will be held by blank. Okay. Earnest money deposit is not the same as security deposit. The earnest money deposit is the first month's rent. And it's held by the listing company in almost all cases. If you are doing a listing, you're a KW United agent and you have a rental listing, the first month's rent will be held by KW United. Okay, if you are representing a tenant, you will reference the listing to look and see who the first month's rent should be payable to. It is most likely going to be the listing company. If it's paid online, obviously you don't have to have your clients get a cashier's check. We do prefer certified funds because then we don't have to wait for that check to clear before the tenant can move in. This says if the application is accepted and the lease is signed, the deposit is credited to the amounts owed to the landlord. Right? It's credited towards first month's rent. If the application is not accepted, the deposit will be returned to the applicant, less any additional document processing charges. The funds held by an escrow agent will be deposited no later than 5 business banking days after the application has been approved. Okay, that's standard escrow law in Virginia, 5 business banking days. Okay. Occupancy is subject to possession being delivered by the present occupant. Premises are accepted as is unless otherwise noted below or by attachment. Okay, so we talked about 2 different things. I'm actually going to stop sharing for a second. We talked about 2 things here. We talked about on the listing side, if you're the landlord, don't expect to have the property ready for the next day in practice for the tenant to move in, right? You need time to prep. This is setting expectations with your landlord when you're taking that listing. There's also setting expectations with your tenant on what to expect when they move in. All right. So this application is saying, hey, listen, the current occupant is the one that's turning this house over to you. So you might be taking possession the next day. So you're going to get this home in the condition that you see it in today, unless you give us a list and we agree to what you want done. There is a discrepancy right now in what the expectations are, right? Because a tenant moving in is expecting for all of the things that are in the lease that they're expected to do when they move out to be done for them before they move in, right? And when we get to the lease, you're going to see things like gutters being cleaned and carpets being professionally cleaned and all of these things, right? That previous tenant might not have done. So the expectations need to be made very clear. If you're a tenant agent and that property is occupied, don't just assume that everybody else is going to do the right thing. Okay. Now, if you are a landlord agent, do the right thing and set the expectations and make sure that the landlord knows that there should be a couple of days of vacancy to make sure that everything is done properly and that the way that they expect the property to be delivered back by the tenant when that tenant moves out is exactly the way that it's delivered. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? If I could get everyone to come through my classes in our entire industry, I feel like it would be so much easier for you guys.
So do I. Shannon, so that if we bring a tenant through a property, then you're saying it could possibly, when they go to begin their lease, it could actually be in the same condition that it's in at that point, unless you ahead of time put that in the agreement.
Right. So like, yeah, an example that we see happen a lot is the wall condition, right?
Mhm.
The condition of the walls has, you know, a lot of nails, a lot of scuff marks, you know, there's just, it's just worn, right? Over the years. And the tenant moves in thinking the landlord was going to have it painted. And the landlord has no plans to paint, right? Because that was not a discussion that was had. It was, hey, this is what it looked like when you showed it. You didn't tell us that you needed it painted, right? So that's a really big one that happens. The landlord is taking for granted that the home will be clean, like clean with chemicals and, you know, scrubbing the toilets and those types of things, and that the receipt will be provided from the professional cleaning of the carpets and those types of things. They're taking for granted that that's going to happen, and all of that will be done prior to having the keys turned over. And in this day and age, another soapbox moment, I suppose, people don't do what they're supposed to, right? They just don't. They don't do what they say they're going to. So here we go, back again with my bracelet, right? You guys are gonna get sick of my bracelet, but I wear it to remind myself, even when I get tired and I'm like, I just don't want to do it. Why should I care? Nobody else cares. Why should I care? Or my kids, right? When I want to beat them senseless and, try to make them be better humans, we have to. And so it's setting the expectations. So the only thing that we can do is handle our own behavior and handle, for the most part, our clients' behavior, right? And handling our clients' behavior is setting those expectations. So when we have a landlord that we know has a tenant in the property, we can get in for inspections, right? We can go show the property, and we're not necessarily advising, right? The property management companies, they will be advising when they do their inspections on, okay, this needs to be done and this needs to be done. But we can certainly have conversations and say, listen, Mr. Landlord, I just went in and showed the property. I just went in and took a look for you. And I'm not so sure that the tenant's going to be out in time to be able to have the carpets cleaned, or this is going to happen. So it's really important that we set those expectations.
So
and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the lease, about what the tenant can be held accountable for with deductions from the security deposit.
So usually, Shannon, we do a walkthrough, correct? Or they're supposed to do a walkthrough with the tenant so that the property's in a certain condition and that's what it's expected to be in afterwards. How does that work when we're dealing with some of our clients who are renting these properties based on a video, and then they're leasing it? Let's say they started the lease in February 1st in order to make sure that they had it, but they're still not here yet based on, it took them a while to get over here. They're visiting with relatives before they ever come. So they've already started the lease, so that then they do the walkthrough when they get here.
So that's interesting. So in the application, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. In the application, I would say that is something important to note in the application, that they will start the lease a certain day, but not take possession physically.
Okay.
Until a certain day necessarily, or that the walkthrough cannot happen until a certain day. So that the expectations are clear. And from our standpoint, that sight unseen document needs to be signed. If we're on the tenant side, that sight unseen document needs to be signed.
What sight unseen document? I didn't know there was one.
Yes, there is a sight unseen document in DocuSign in our Market Center Forms folder that is to be signed by anyone, buyers or tenants, that are putting in an offer or an application on a property they have not ever physically seen.
Okay.
And I think we went over that document in boot camp. So it would be, you can reference it in those that packet as well.
Shannon, a question. Is the tenant has to do the walkthrough with the tenant agent after the lease is signed, right? How many days before?
Okay, so I'm gonna put us on hold on talking about anything related to the actual lease or walkthroughs or any of that right now. That's gonna be after lunch.
Okay, great.
Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and get through the rest of the application. Okay. So contact information for the applicant goes here, phone numbers, email addresses. They're initially in the bottom. Here is a list of documents that are needed with the application. So we have W-2s if they're an hourly or employee or salaried employee, 1040 or Schedule C if they are self-employed. So that's going to be their last 2 years of tax returns. A copy of LES and orders if they're military, right? Because they may not have changed duty stations yet. So that's what's going to verify that they have employment here. There's a couple of other items that are listed on here, like the photo ID, 2 forms of ID, or a valid photo is required before signing the lease. It's talking about how the tenant is responsible for having renter's insurance on the property before occupying the premises. It is also mentioned in the lease. Any move-in fees or utility deposits are the responsibility of the applicant. Sometimes there are move-in fees that are associated with a condo or like an elevator fee or something like that, that should be disclosed in the listing. Only persons listed on the application are allowed to live in the property. The premises are not to be used for businesses except with the consent of landlord, and as long as it conforms with applicable laws and regulations. So some HOAs don't allow businesses to be run out of a house. Okay, and the applicant has no leasehold interest until the lease is signed. So what that means is nothing's binding until the lease is signed. Okay, even if the application is accepted, there's nothing enforceable until the lease is signed. So the applicants sign here in the middle that the listing firm is authorized to verify any information that is in this application. So now there's some further information about the applicant. So full name, date of birth, social security numbers or tax ID numbers, their current address, how long they've lived there, do they rent or own, right? So they would have a mortgage, their current landlord, property management or mortgage company, name and contact information. Why are they moving? Previous street address. So this is going to be a requirement if they have lived in that property for less than 2 years for almost all of the applicants. If they've lived there for like 10 years, then there are a lot of companies that really don't care if it's, you know, the previous address is there, but it's really that 2 years is important. If they're renting, a lot of companies do want that previous one to verify rental history on that. Employment, current employer, previous employer, same types of information. Do they have additional income? That might be like, could be a second job. It could be alimony or child support, something like that. List debts. So a lot of us this day and age have more than 2 debts that would show up on our credit report. An additional sheet of paper can be included if there's additional assets or debts to be listed. And this is just to give an idea of debt to income ratio. Okay. Waterbeds or large aquariums, sometimes those are not allowed. So yes or no? Do you intend to smoke or permit smoking on the premises? Yes or no? So permit smoking, like a family member that smokes, right? Yes or no? Now this is one of the greatest pieces that is your script, right? For asking like, hey, is there anything funky that, you know, is going to come up on your application that's going to prevent you from being approved, right? This is how you have that conversation. So have they ever filed for bankruptcy? Have they ever been evicted? Do they have any judgments? Foreclosures? Are they party to a lawsuit right now? Do you pay alimony or child support? So that's going to reduce their income, right? Are you a co-signer on a loan or another lease? Have you ever had a rental application rejected? Will you require a visual smoke detector? Okay, right? That's a reasonable accommodation because of someone that might be hearing impaired. Are you entitled to diplomatic immunity? That's an important one because leases are not enforceable for diplomats. How would you rate your credit? Poor, average, good, excellent, right? Animals. Do you have any animals? The information would go here. So animals, there is a difference between pets and service animals, and we are going to talk about that today. But we need to know if there are any animals. What kind of vehicles, right? That's what's going to be parked at the property. Sometimes they have to be registered. Occupants over 18 must submit separate applications. So this is anyone under 18. Okay, dependents. Designated contacts. If something was to happen, who do we call in case of an emergency? That is what goes here. Okay. Questions on the application? This is a very outdated document, so we are looking to change it.
It might be too early to ask you, but co-signers, they should have these done as well, correct?
Yeah, so really in Virginia, under the VRLTA, there isn't a such thing as a cosigner. Everybody is 100% responsible for the lease. So they would just be another applicant, just not occupying the property.
So Shannon, are you saying that we should be going over this rental application with them prior to showing them homes?
Yes, during your tenant consultation, yes.
Okay.
Me again. I'm not trying to beat this dead horse, but Chapter 8 vouchers. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. They have to, as you said before, you know, pay all the fees that everyone else has to pay up front.
Mhm.
So the first month's rent and the application fee and everything else.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, they still have to qualify just like a normal applicant.
Okay.
On the Section 8s, does a Section 8 that's providing the funds, are they the ones who pay the first month's rent and the deposit, the security deposit, or does the applicant?
So generally, the applicant is who pays the security deposit, and
Okay.
because the lease is in the applicant's name, and so
Right.
that's who pays the security deposit. The first month's rent is required to be paid prior to occupancy. So there are times where that first month's rent may not be paid with the application, but it has to be paid prior to occupancy.
Okay.
All right, so actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. How many of you know that there are documents that are for service animals, for applications for service animals, and that landlords can request verification of the disability? And there are documents for physical structure accommodations if there's something that's needed because of a disability. How many of you, before you looked at the packet today, knew? Rachel, you knew. Who else knew? Layla and Young knew. Good. I'm glad you raised your hands. I knew you knew, but I'm glad you raised your hands and show everyone else you knew.
You had to guide me through that, Shannon.
Yes. So there is a difference between, a service animal, the ADA compliant service animal, an emotional support animal. There are other accommodations that clients might need for moving into a property, right? Certain handicap. People will have, if it's a physical handicap where they have like a wheelchair, they might need to have a cabinet taken out so that they can wheel up underneath a cabinet, right? So that might be where you see like handicap accessible properties, right? In our MLS. If a tenant needs that, then that would be a reasonable structure accommodation request, and a landlord can't deny that. Sometimes the tenant would have to pay for that, but they can't deny that it happened. Sometimes people need like grab bars put in the shower, or a ramp put outside, or something, right? So we have documents for that. So I will share my screen again, and we will look at those documents. So this,
I have a question. This is Z.
sure.
So with service and service animal and support animal, I've been told that either of them need, I mean, if a tenant has either of them, it doesn't need to be disclosed until you're writing the contract or until the contract is accepted. Because if you disclose it to a listing that says no pets allowed, then the tenant, I mean the landlord, is going to make an excuse as to why he's not accepting the offer or the contract.
So I guess some would, right, that aren't fully up to speed on how things work. The service animals are not pets, and they can require verification of the disability, and a tenant can be preemptive and have the verification of disability form filled out and sent. And if they qualify on everything else, then this landlord would be at risk of being in a fair housing violation that could cost them a lot of money.
So they have, even if they don't have that they allow animals, you still would have to allow a service animal
That's
if
correct.
everything else qualifies.
As long as it would not put the landlord in a hardship. So for example,
Okay.
if the landlord is, let's say the landlord's overseas, had occupied the property as a primary residence and is overseas for work, and is, when they're transferred back, they intend to occupy the property as their primary residence again, and they have an anaphylactic reaction to whatever the animal is, they could deny the service animal in the home because it puts the landlord at a great risk, right? But if they simply just don't want pets, right, then they can't decline.
Shannon, I have a question.
Yes.
Wow.
Does the landlord need to, is the landlord required to prove the possible anaphylactic reaction?
Well, if they decline it and they were brought to court,
Oh, okay.
they would have to prove it.
That's a whole, thank you. Okay.
Now, we know that service animals are different than, emotional support animals. And this is my confusion. Are emotional support animals considered not pets when it comes to landlord tenant?
So this application for the reasonable accommodation is what is going to verify whether that animal is a necessity for the tenant.
Okay, so as
Okay.
long as they have the paperwork that provides that it's a necessity, then that would be okay.
Right, so this document is generally filled out by the tenant, right? And it says that they have to fill out the description of the reasonable accommodation. So in this case, right, it's generally for the service or emotional support animal. They're describing the disability related to the requested accommodation. For reasonable accommodation requests for assistance animals, they have to complete more information below. So they're going to put the information about the requested animal, the type of breed. Will the animal work, provide assistance, perform services for the requester? Will the requested animal provide emotional support that alleviates one or more of the identified symptoms or effects of the person's disability?
Gotcha, okay.
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 Yep. And if yes, please provide details. Okay. And then we'll come back to this one because it's structure related. This verification of disability form is going to be filled out by, so this first page is authorization from the tenant, right? For it to be filled out. This is to be provided by a medical professional. Okay, and the medical professional has to be in Virginia, right? So this is not, you go online and you say you need the certificate to take your dog on the plane with you, right?
Got it.
This is actually a medical professional who has treated the tenant, right? So the firm name or practice, the address, they're going to describe the nature of their relationship, right, with the requester. So it's either their primary care physician, they are their therapist, whoever they are. Are they providing verification via online or telemedicine? So this means, are they meeting with them via Zoom, right? Or the Zoom equivalent, or in person? All right, they have to provide the state or states that they're licensed and what services they provide. And then they have to document and verify that this accommodation is for a disability. So once they do that and they send it back, if they have confirmed, right? Now, if someone really has a disability and they really need the service animal, they're going to jump through the hoops. If they were trying to play a game and they saying that their pet is their emotional support animal, they're not going to go through all of this, right?
Right.
So this is the assistance animal approval notice. So
Got
this is
it.
where the landlord approves it. If they have submitted the reasonable accommodation request and the certificate that they got online, right, that says, I need this support animal, this is the denial notice because they weren't able to provide the appropriate verification. Okay, so there is an approval notice and a denial notice. Okay.
Jen, I have a question on the doctor being in Virginia. What if they're moving here and their doctor is in Florida and they're doing all this with just like one trip up and doing it and then the next time they're here is when they move here? Can it be a
Yes.
doctor from a different state?
So if it's someone that they have been seeing regularly in that previous state, so it's not someone that they just went to for one appointment, because then they could just come to someone for one appointment in Virginia, right?
I see.
So it's someone
yes.
that they have been under the care, then that would be considered an exception to being required to be a medical professional in Virginia.
Very good. Thank you.
Now, this second document here is for the reasonable modification request for physical structures. So this is when there is a disability that requires structural modifications to the dwelling unit or common areas, or to install assistive or other services at their own expense. So this is at the tenant's expense. Okay, this isn't at the landlord's expense. This is everything that would be provided. So the name of the proposed contractor, the copy of the contractor's license, the bond to secure the performance of the licensed contractor, any engineer certificate or architect drawing for the proposed modifications, plans, insurance policy from the contractor, any permits required to do that, the type of work. And then an estimate by the contractor to remove the modification, right? So to put the property back the way it was. And does the tenant agree to restore the premises back to the way it was prior to their move out? And the payments for the restoration, will they put money into an escrow account or pay something per month for that? So this is all for those reasonable accommodations, okay? So NVAR tried to put some things in place a couple of years ago so that there were documents already there that could be used to help ease some of this, okay? And the verification of the disability can be used on either structure or service animal.
So now, Shannon, is this a requirement if, I mean, it's not the tenant's, not the landlord's decision. If the tenant wants to do this, is the landlord required to do that? Just like the service dog?
Yeah, so the landlord is required to allow it.
To allow it, okay.
Right. But the tenant has to provide all of that information,
Right.
right? So it can't just be, you know, oh, my brother-in-law is handy. He's going to come in with a sledgehammer and, you know, take down walls and build this stuff, right? It has to be agreed upon.
But there's no choice on the landlord's part. In other words, he can't say no.
Right.
Okay.
Now, if the landlord has a contractor or the landlord has somebody that they would rather have do it, and it wouldn't be an outrageous, you know, more of an expense to the tenant, then they certainly could work together on it. And the
Right.
landlord could say, I'd like my contractor to do it. Let's work something out. Right.
But they can't deny the tenant.
They can't deny the tenant if the verification of disability comes through. That's right. Okay, it's 11:52, so we're gonna stop. This is a good stopping point for us. I'm sure everybody's getting hungry. I'm getting hungry. So you know that's a good stopping point. You don't ever want me hangry. So I will take any questions that you guys have before we break for lunch. And I'm going to give you guys an hour today. Break for lunch, get caught up in emails and phone calls and, you know, let your ears recover from listening to my voice for the 2 hours. And then we'll jump back on at 1 and go through the lease and walkthroughs and, you know, those types of things. So who has any questions that we didn't address already? Anybody? Okay. If you think of any while you're eating lunch, you can write them down, and we'll have time for questions this afternoon. And hopefully I don't keep you all the way to 3 o'clock. I just wasn't sure, since it's a new format, I'd rather let you out early than keep you late. All right, so go eat lunch. Don't log off, just like turn off your cameras. And I'm going to stop the recording so that when we put it on later, we don't have to like fast forward through lunch. And then I'll see you guys back at 1 o'clock. Okay.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so did anybody think of any questions while you were at lunch that you're just dying to ask right now before we look at the lease? No?
I think I have a question that is, if you charge one client, you need to charge everybody, right? It's like you cannot just do a fee for one client and then the next one, you have to be
Consistent, right?
consistent, right? Okay,
Yep,
that was
that's
my
right.
question. Thank you.
Just like in the sales, right? We're
Mhm.
not charging different fees to different people for the same services.
No,
So
okay.
if you're going to incorporate rentals into your business, which I highly encourage. I was actually having a conversation with an agent here in the Falls Church office while we were on break for lunch about how rentals can turn into buyers down the road. Renters can have friends that need to buy or sell, so you can get referrals from your rental clients. So while the commission itself on the surface looks very low, they really can be advocates for you. When you treat a rental client the same way that you would treat a buyer or seller who is giving you commission that has an extra zero at the end, it really is something, right? They really can become advocates for you. And sometimes you'll run into a situation where you meet a renter who doesn't realize they can buy. And so when you do that tenant needs analysis, right, when you're having that consultation, you might find out that they think they have to have 20% down, right? And they don't have that much saved. And so they think that they're just out of the market completely. Or that it's just such a crazy market that why should they go look for something to buy when maybe what they would look for, there aren't 25 offers, on that type of property. So anyway, I would encourage everyone to keep an open mind about rentals. Let me share my screen. And actually, bear with me for 1 second because I don't see it up on the screen behind me. I think I was scrolling through just to see how much we had left to see whether there was a chance I could get you out before 3 o'clock. And I think we can. Because I do encourage you guys to read these documents word for word. I don't read them to you word for word. I want you guys to read them word for word. I think it's more important for us to talk about the situations and the real life experiences. All right, so the lease. This is the VRLTA lease. Now, we did talk earlier about how some management companies have their own lease. I think it's best when everybody operates under the VRLTA lease. It does stress me out a little bit when I see these other leases from the management companies because they don't incorporate all of the updated law. I catch things all the time. And for those of you that have done rentals before and turned them in for my review and command, some of you have seen where I've sent notes back that say, hey, please let the listing agent and your tenant know that XYZ, in the lease isn't enforceable, or XYZ is out of date or whatever, because they haven't stayed up with the times. Because of COVID and restrictions and eviction moratoriums and things like that, there have been a lot of changes since March of 2020. All right, so fill in the blank. The lease is made on blank, which is the effective date, and it's between the landlord and the tenant. It is not between the management company and the tenant. It's between the landlord and the tenant, and the landlord is going to be who's on the deed. Okay, so just like on your listings and on your contracts, I ask for a copy of the tax record in command because I'm verifying the name of the landlord is who's the owner. If there are two owners listed in the tax record, I will likely catch it if there's only one landlord listed on this lease. Okay, so I'm going to ask for some additional information if I only see one. who represents the listing side and who represents the tenant are the next boxes. Okay. The premises, what's the address? What subdivision is it in? Parking spaces, remember parking space numbers are what convey with the property. Mailbox numbers, again, what convey with the property. And if it's condo, what's the unit number? And if there's a storage bin, what's the storage bin? The landlord shall deliver possession of the premises to the tenant at what time of day on the lease start date. So this is negotiable. I see generally either 9 a.m. or 12 noon. I don't generally see anything that varies outside of those two things. It's either 9 a.m. or 12 noon on the lease start date. And the tenant shall vacate the premises no later than 12 noon or 9 p.m. on the lease end date are a lot of times what I see. Sometimes I'll see 5 p.m. Again, I don't see much variation from that. So that is the lease end date. And that's when the property shall be vacated unless the landlord and tenant have agreed in writing to extend the lease end date or have executed a new lease. So executed a new lease means they've renewed the lease, right, for a new term. So anywhere in the lease that it talks about the lease term, it's defined as the start date to the end date. The landlord or tenant may deliver notice to either party that they wish to extend the lease end date or execute a new lease not less than 60 days prior to the end of the lease. So if nobody communicates that they want to extend the lease, like, hey, I need an extra month, or I want to renew my lease, then it just automatically ends. There's no notice, right, that has to be provided. They're just going to leave. Now, is it best practice to communicate with them to make sure they're going to leave on the end date? Well, yes, it is, right? So communication is key, but they don't actually have to give notice that they're going to leave. Early termination of occupancy. This causes a lot of confusion. There's really no such thing as early termination of occupancy when it comes to a lease break fee, so that tenants can get out of their lease unless further in the lease, there is a provision for a job transfer. Okay, so what this says is that the tenant doesn't have to be released from any liability or responsibility from this lease should they want to vacate. Okay, so it's not like they can give 60-day notice and pay a 2 months fee and then they get out of the lease, right? It's not like that at all. They are responsible for the entire lease term unless there is a mutual agreement in writing to what that termination is, or one of the provisions for the job transfer applies later in the lease, okay? So a tenant who wants to go buy a house needs to be very careful and needs to work something out with their landlord prior to going to make an offer, okay? Rent. All right. I don't want you guys to read this part right now. This is the most confusing part of the entire lease. I want to see everybody's cameras on that's actually paying attention. And if you can't turn your camera on, put in the chat that you can't turn your camera on so that I know you're actually paying attention. Oh, I love all your faces. I know that you guys turn off your camera when you know I can't see you, and that's okay. Although I do check periodically when I'm talking about something, just so you know, I open up the screen so I can see who's on. Okay. The lease talks about how there's a start date and an end date, right? Most of the time we're doing 12-month leases, right? Maybe we're doing a 24-month lease. When we talk about that, it's full calendar month. So if we start on the middle of the month, so let's say there was a lease that was going to start today, which is the 14th. we would actually be thinking about a 12-month lease as starting from March 1st. We're not going to write that on the lease, but we're thinking about the full calendar months as March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and then January and February of next year. Okay, so those are the 12 full calendar months if we're doing a 12-month lease. And then we have the prorated days in February that are just like the fluff. Okay, so if we're doing a 12-month lease, it's going to be February 14th of 2022 to February, I don't know if there's 28 or 29 days next year. So let's just go with 28. February 28th of 2023. Okay, that's going to be your 12 months. All right. Now, we have to talk about that first month's rent. We don't ever want a tenant to move in with the prorated amount of rent as all they have to come up with to move in. We want to make sure that they can pay a full month's rent when they move in. We want to make sure they're financially sound and have enough money to pay that full month's rent when they move in. And when we go back and I show you the document, it says that a full month's rent has to be paid prior to occupancy. So if you think back to that earnest money deposit we talked about, that's the first month's rent that it's referencing. So what's happening is the first full month's rent is being paid up front, and then the prorate is being paid on the first day of the full month. So they're being paid backwards. So it gets a little confusing because you're not paying the amount that's due on the actual date that the bill has been incurred. Okay, so the February 14th to 28th would be paid March 1st. And the March 1st rent would be paid sometime before February 14th. So they'll be paid backwards. Okay, and then starting on April 1st, they're just going to send their rent in whatever way is mentioned in the lease on however they're supposed to pay, whether it's an automatic transfer, whether they're supposed to mail a check, whatever they're supposed to do. Okay.
Shannon,
Yes.
is that because the contract says that they need to put an earnest money deposit? So the earnest money is the full first month's rent?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. It's really the practice of wanting a tenant to move in, showing they're financially sound and paying that full month's rent that makes us have the other documents say that the full month's rent has to be paid prior. Because if they were moving in, let's say they're moving in on the 25th, their prorated number of days is only the 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th. That's 4 days. So anybody can come up with 4 days worth of rent money. They get possession of the property, and then March 1st comes around and they're like, oh, I got to come up with $2,000 worth of rent. And then you're trying to chase them down for the full month's rent. Okay. Yeah, Sherry. I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I did. I have a question that, because a current one, they wanted a security deposit and the first month's rent, and then there was a prorate. The security deposit is held until the end of the lease.
Yes.
Okay, so, and then the other reason I understood that they pay the first month's rent is because that's really where the commissions come out of as well.
Yes, and yes, in practice, that's also how the commissions are paid. So then the agents don't have to track down their commissions from the clients. We have that first month's rent paid to the listing brokerage, and then the listing brokerage disperses.
That was my next question, because the last encounter I had with an agent on the other side that was representing the landlord, even the lease wasn't right, and this section definitely wasn't right. And so when they do the check, the cashier's check, is it my understanding that it's to go to the brokerage and the brokerage disperse it?
For the
Does she
first
have-
month's rent, yes.
Correct. Okay, would the rent then for the partial amount, would that go to the normal landlord or the management company?
Yes,
Okay,
it would. Yep, security deposit would go to the owner or the management company, whoever whoever they're directing the payments
Okay.
to.
okay.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So I'm going to go back and share. And then we'll read how the paragraph is. Actually, bear with me 1 second before I go into this. Sorry, it sounded like they were having a party outside my door and I had to go be me for a minute. So sorry. All right. So here is the paragraph. So what it says is the total rent for the initial lease term shall be blank and payable in monthly installments. So what you would do here, if it's that 12 months plus the prorate, is you're going to multiply the 12 months plus the prorate and put that total here. So if it's $2,000 a month, you're going to take 2,000 times 12, which is 24,000. And just to keep the math easy, we're going to say $1,000 is half a month. So it's going to be $25,000. Right? Payable in monthly installments. The first full month's rent. So in our scenario, the first full month's rent is March in the amount of $2,000 shall be payable prior to occupancy and in certified funds, cashier's check or money order. Monthly installments of $2,000 are due in advance on the first day of each month, beginning in April, right? Beginning on April 1st, without notification, demand, or deduction. If the lease begins on a date other than the first of the month, the rent shall be prorated with $1,000 due on March 1st for the period of February 14th to February 28th. And then it goes on to say that only one rent check or electronic payment will be accepted. If you have roommates, you can have an addendum that says the landlord will accept multiple payments. The reason that it says here that one rent check will be accepted is because in Virginia, each lease holder is 100% responsible for the rent. So if you have two roommates, so if Sherry and Gina were roommates and Sherry paid $1,000 and Gina paid $1,000, there wouldn't be a recourse to come back later if Gina paid her $1,000 1 month and Sherry didn't, for Gina to say, well, I paid my half. You have to go after Sherry for her half. Because everyone is 100% responsible for the lease, okay? Are there questions about this section? You will see some companies, generally not individuals, but sometimes there are management companies that will have you like a lease start on the 14th and then you end on the 13th of the following year. So it's not full calendar months, but more often than not, you are going to see the full calendar months plus the prorate is how these are done.
I have a question, Shannon. So let's say with your February example.
Mhm.
So if they are moving mid-February, the full first month rent is in February when they move in. And then that prorated amount of $1,000 is applied to March.
So their full first month is actually March's rent.
Right, and then the prorated amount. Wait, so the full, okay, so regardless of when is it applied, the full first month is for March, and then when they pay in March.
In this example, Z, they're paying March and February backwards. They're paying March's rent before they move in, and they're gonna pay February's rent on March 1st.
Oh, okay, that was my confusion. So the prorated amount is paid prior to them moving.
No, the full month's rent is paid prior to them moving, and then the prorated amount is paid on the first day of the month after they move in.
Okay, so they paid $2,000 before they move in, and then March 1st, they paid the $1,000.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You are welcome. Okay, so late payment return checks, etc. This section, just to give you guys a little insight, when you see a lease that is not the VRLTA lease, this is the main area that I see that is incorrect on the other leases. Okay, this is the main area that has not been updated to reflect the current laws. Okay, and actually this lease, for some reason, is not updated to reflect, oh no, it is, never mind, it is. Okay, so they have updated to allow, meaning Richmond, has updated to allow tenants more time to get their rent in, and they have made it a little more clear on how many days a landlord has to wait before they can start the eviction process, and what we can charge. I say we because I'm always thinking about PPM, what a landlord can charge for late fees, etc. So this paragraph says that if rent is received after the 5th of the month, so they have to give a grace period. If it's received after the 5th of the month, so days 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are in the grace period. If it's received on day 6, the landlord can charge 10%, the lesser of 10% of the total monthly rent, or 10% of the remaining balance due and owed by the tenant. So if they paid half on the 1st and they're paying half on the 10th, you cannot charge the 10% of the full rent. You have to charge 10% of the remaining balance. Okay. There also could be a flat fee that's charged as long as it is not an amount that exceeds the 10% number. Any return checks for insufficient funds or, failed electronic transfer or anything like that can also have a charge. So if someone has a check that's returned for an NSF and it comes back after the 5th of the month, they might have a late fee and a return check fee. Okay, so they can be charged the face amount of the dishonored payment, right, which is their rent fee usually, the amount charged by the bank, so the NSF fee, an administrative fee of $50, interest from the date of the check transfer, a recovery fee not to exceed $250. So that's like if you have to really track them down to get this money, and all other amounts recoverable by the landlord pursuant to the lease or law. So that's like attorney's fees. Okay. Late payments of rent or dishonored payments, in English, that's Nsf fees, Nsf checks, constitute default under the lease. Okay. So that's default, not breach of a contract term. That's considered default. All right. Now it says, who is the landlord paying? Are they paying the landlord? Are they paying the managing agent? So that depends if there's a property management company or not. And some property management companies still have the landlord paid. Most of the time, that's not the case because property management companies are providing a service to the landlord. So they are actually collecting the rent on their behalf. Now, this is another section that updated. Failure to pay rent, right? It used to be after the 5 days. So on day 6, when that late fee was applied, a landlord could also deliver a pay or quit notice, right? And it was a 5-day pay or quit notice. So now it says that if the tenant doesn't pay rent within 14 days after the landlord has given the default notice, the landlord can terminate the lease. So now it's a 14-day pay or quit notice. So on day 6, when that late fee hits, that pay or quit notice can still be delivered, but the landlord has to give 14 days to remedy, not just 5. So that is different. Management. Who's the property manager? This is not you as the agent. This is not the landlord's best friend who just wants to help him out. This is an actual property manager, okay? And their information would go here. If the premises are not professionally managed, then the landlord's address, phone number, and email address are here, okay? This isn't enough space in most cases if the landlord wants to have electronic deposits. So you can put that information on an addendum or in the other term section if they with banking information where the funds are supposed to be fixed. Okay. The listing company is acting only as a rental agent and has no liability or responsibility for property management. Okay. None. You're not the property manager. All right. Appointment of resident agent by non-resident landlord. So any individual non-resident of Virginia who owns and leases residential real property in Virginia shall have and continuously maintain an agent who is a resident and maintains a business office in Virginia. Okay, so if you have a landlord who lives out of town, out of Virginia, and they have hired PPM to be their property management company, you're good, right? Because they have somebody who is maintaining a business office here. They're the contact, right? This is so that you don't have tenants that move in and send rent payments and then something goes wrong and they can never reach anybody. If you have a tenant who lives overseas and wants you to be their resident agent, you're still not their property manager. What I'm going to discourage you from being the resident agent. I can't stop you from being the resident agent, but I'm going to discourage you from being the resident agent if they have someone else that they can use as a resident agent. If they have an accountant or an attorney or another business professional in Virginia that can be their resident agent, or if there is a family member, I'm going to suggest that, okay? But you being the resident agent are not the property manager for them. You are like the emergency contact, okay?
And can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
So if it's a military family that they call me to list their property, and right now they live in Springfield, for example, but they are moving in April, right? So in the time that I do the agreement, they live here. So what I should put in this case? Do I should put that, you know, they live here, so they put their self, or what I should do in this case?
Well, so this is for the lease. So if
Mhm.
they know they're moving,
Mhm.
then they need to find someone who's going to be the resident agent for when they move out of Virginia.
Sounds good.
And if they're moving out of Virginia, then they should consider a property management company.
Perfect. Okay, good. Thank you.
I have a quick question. How much do the property management companies normally charge for that service?
Layla and Young, are you there? Would you like to unmute for a moment?
Yes.
Orlando would like to know what our average charge is for property management services.
8% a month.
Okay.
monthly.
Yes.
Okay.
And right now, we are offering specials because we have the bandwidth right now to take on some new properties. So we are offering specials, and this goes for everybody. It's a good segue. There's a $200 a month bonus for agents right now when they refer a client to PPM that signs a 12-month property management agreement after the first month that we have collected rent from the tenant. So it's generally the second month that the tenant lives there. Then we pay a $200 bonus to the agents.
Is 200 for each client that you refer, or just for
Yes.
the first refer?
Every referral you send.
I have one referral coming now at email. If you can send me the link, I'm going to do right now.
You can make as much money as you want.
I like
on
that.
referral.
I like
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Yes.
yes, sounds good. So send me the link. I appreciate.
Yes, we will talk about that.
Thank you so
I will
much.
get it to you, Veronica. Yeah.
Great, I
So,
love it.
and it's so super easy, right? When you refer, there are some companies like inside the Beltway that I have seen charge 10%. And I do think that the services that PPM provides at 8% are extraordinary. So, and we can get everybody a list of what those services are. Every company is a little bit different, but we try to be better than the rest. And I think we do a good job. All right, truthfulness of representations in the rental application. So if someone lies on the application and after the lease is entered into, the landlord finds out, the landlord has the right to immediately terminate that lease because it was false representation that got that tenant approved. So it's just a reminder that everybody has to be honest. Sorry, Amanda, I didn't see your question before I moved on. Yes, property management companies do things like collecting rent, and they re-rent the property. So PPM will list the property through KW United in Fredericksburg, and they will advertise it and get applicants in and screen the applicants so that they can fill the vacancy. They will coordinate with contractors. They will help with any repairs that need to happen before a tenant moves in or after a tenant moves out. We have an escrow account that holds security deposits. We also hold escrow for repairs from the landlord. So they give us, like $500, and we hold it in escrow so that, small repairs can just be done. We do inspections periodically during the lease term so that we know what the condition of the property is. So it's not a surprise when a tenant moves out. And I will say during COVID, we had a very low delinquency rate when it came to the rent payments from the tenants, because Layla and Young stayed in contact with the tenants the entire time and in contact with the landlords the entire time. And Layla was able to get funding from the state of Virginia for the tenants that had a need when they had lost their jobs or had had their income cut. She was able to help them file the paperwork to be able to get the funding from the state of Virginia. So our landlords were very, very happy because they might have had to wait a month or two to be able to get the rent paid, but we were able to even get some back rent paid. And I think that, I mean, one of them, I think may have been like $10,000 because we were able to get back rent paid.
But do they help like during the lease? So I'm actually in a rent house right now, and our landlord would definitely benefit from something like that because she takes forever to get back. We're actually looking to buy now because we're tired of the back and forth. But do they help with that part? Like our AC and heater isn't working. So do they schedule that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so actually Young is, she's the one that gets all the calls for any anything that needs to happen for maintenance while someone's living in the property. So she schedules all of that during the tenancy. So she gets to know the tenants very well, and Layla knows the landlords very well. So they're a great pair.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Karen, the inspections, so the way we do it, they're scheduled, they're not scheduled prior to the lease being signed. They're scheduled during the tenancy. So, you know, there would be plenty of notice, right? They would get a phone call that says, you know, hey, we're coming up on your, 6-month inspection. We just want to see what's a good time for us to stop by. So it's not intrusive, right? It's not, hey, we're going to be by tomorrow. Now, not every management company is like that. Some will go to the letter of the lease, which we'll get to, which says that there only has to be a certain amount of notice that's given. And some like want to give a surprise because they're like, they want to see what it really looks like. They don't want to give time for people to clean up. But we understand that people live there and it's not always, in show condition. All right, uses. So the tenant will use the premises solely as a single family residence and only for the people on the application. So this talks about, like not using it like as a sublet, right? You're not using it as an Airbnb that you're subletting out. You're not using it for business, and you're not having other people move in that you didn't disclose on your application. It also talks about having occasional visits by guests that don't exceed 2 weeks during any consecutive 12-month period without written consent of the landlord. So if your tenant has family that's overseas, right? So like my sister-in-law, her mom just came over from the Philippines and she's staying for a month. So if they were in a rental, she would need to reach out to the landlord and say, hey, we want my mom to come to visit, stay, for a month. Is that okay? You get it in writing, it can be an email, whatever. And that's okay because that's an extra person that's quote unquote living in the home. Okay. It goes on at the bottom just to talk about how there can be no sale or disposition of drugs or paraphernalia and, nothing illegal happening in the house. And that if the landlord finds out about it, the landlord can give the tenant notice requiring the tenant to vacate the property within 72 hours. Okay. Pets. So this is the tenant having permission to have a pet in the property, and there's a pet addendum that goes with that to talk about what the responsibilities are when it comes to the pet. Smoking, yes or no, is it allowed, is it not? And it clarifies that, like e-cigarettes, vaping is also considered smoking. HOA, condo associations or co-ops, this is where it's confirmed in the lease that everybody's on the same page, that it is a condo, it is a co-op, it is an HOA, and there are rules. And whether or not the tenant has already been provided the association rules, or they will be provided, and that really regardless of whether they have been or will be provided, the tenant still is required to follow the rules, regardless of whether the landlord has given them the information. The tenant is still required to seek out the rules so that they can comply. Vehicle parking. So this is just a reminder that they have to comply with the rules for vehicles that and in the jurisdiction, and that they have to have current license plates and stickers if applicable. Utilities. Okay, so this is the counterpart to what we talked about on the listing agreement. The tenant will make any required deposits and pay for the following services. So water, sewer, gas, electricity, trash removal, etc. There's also a spot for the tenant to purchase a utility service from a specific vendor. So sometimes there is a specific vendor that the landlord will need to require the tenant to buy the service from. So for example, if there is propane or an oil tank and the tank is leased from a vendor, then as part of the lease, generally you have to buy the oil or propane from that vendor. So that might be something that would be written in here. Landlord maintenance. Except as otherwise noted, the landlord shall maintain the premises in compliance with the Uniform Statewide Building Code and the VRLTA, and shall be responsible for repairs not due to the fault or negligence of the tenant. Okay, that's easy. Fixtures and appliances. This paragraph is from the listing agreement as well, right? Windows, shades, blinds, carpet, plumbing, etc. Be careful with the appliances, right? Appliances and as-is appliances, because if the landlord does decide that they want to put all appliances in as-is condition, the tenant really needs this to be highlighted. I would even suggest adding a hash mark here and having everybody initial, so everybody understands what as-is means, so that if the stove breaks, you know, the landlord's going to have to remove the stove and let a buyer bring in the stove if they have to buy a new one, and then the buyer gets to take the stove with them, right? It really can be a problem. And I also think that we need to really consider how we're setting expectations with our landlords if they are trying to do that. And we need to advertise in the listing that the whatever it is going to be an as-is condition before we take a tenant's money, right? Approve their application and then try to slide a lease in front of them. Here is something that you guys might not know. The landlord certifies to the tenant that the smoke alarms have been installed in accordance with the law, and that they have been certified to be in working condition. So every 12 months in Virginia, the landlord has to have the smoke detectors checked and certify that they're in working condition. Did you guys know that? It's part of the VRLTA.
No,
So-
our house have them.
Yeah. So just make sure that you're.
Can you repeat that? The timeline for smoke detectors?
Smoke detectors have to be checked every 12 months by the landlord and to be certified in working condition. And there's actually a paragraph in our contract that talks about the smoke detectors as well, that the smoke detectors are supposed to be certified to be in working condition before closing. All right, security deposit. The security deposit prior to the beginning of the lease term, the tenant shall deposit a sum of blank to be held by blank. Okay, so this is one of the parts of the lease that I do look at when I'm reviewing. I look to make sure that this held by does not say KW United. Because we don't ever hold security deposits. This is going to be either the landlord or the property management company. This is never going to be KW United. The landlord can apply security deposit to the payment of accrued rent and damages caused by the tenant after the tenant is moved out. This is not something that we apply to while they're still living there, okay? The landlord has the right to apply the security deposit to non-rent items first and then unpaid rent. So this isn't like, oh, there's 30 days left in the lease. Can you just use my security deposit to, pay for my last month's rent? Well, if there's damages, then how are you ever going to recover the money for the damages, right? Within 45 days after the termination of the tenancy or tenant vacating premises, whichever occurs last, okay? So if tenant vacates early, but the lease doesn't expire, the 45 days ends at the end of the lease expiration. If the tenant fails to move out at the end of the lease expiration and they stay for an extra 2 weeks when they weren't supposed to, then it's 45 days from when they have vacated. The landlord has to provide an itemized statement of the estimated deductions to be charged against their security deposit and return the deposit less any deductions. Okay, so if the estimate exceeds the security deposit, then there's no money to go back. If there's no deductions, then the full security deposit goes back. There is no longer interest due and payable on security deposits under the VRLTA. Okay, there used to be a long time ago after a security deposit was held for 13 months, there would be interest due. I'm very glad that doesn't happen anymore. The tenant is responsible to write a check and pay the cost of repairs for anything that exceeds the security deposit. The tenant has to provide the landlord with written notice prior to vacating with their forwarding address so that the landlord knows where to send that statement and their security deposit. The landlord would have to send the security deposit or statement to their last known address. I'm sorry, the security deposit statement, but they don't have to send the money until the tenant notifies them of where to send the money. They don't just have to send the money out into an abyss. All right, the landlord shall provide notification to the tenant of the name, address, and phone number of the new managing agent or new landlord in the event of a change in rental management or the sale, transfer, or assignment of landlord's interest in the premises. In the event of a sale or assignment, the landlord will transfer the security deposit and be released of all liability in connection with the lease. The tenant will request the return of the security deposit from the new managing agent or landlord. Okay, so this is important because you guys also do sales to know that this is automatic, right? This is a function of the law. We talk about this a lot, and in our focus group, our little subcommittee that we have with the NBA Forms Committee, we're looking at a document that we can maybe create to go with the contract so that it's easy for everybody to know that there's a lease already in place and how much the rent is and what the security deposit is and what needs to transfer, so that it doesn't have to just be buried here in the lease. All right, move-in inspection. Within 5 days after the beginning of the lease, the landlord shall submit a written report to the tenant itemizing the condition of the premises at occupancy, including the identification of any visible evidence of mold. Mold has to be remediated. Okay, so that's why they have to provide that they know about mold, because it has to be remediated. The report is for information only and does not constitute an agreement for repairs. Okay, so the landlord is saying, hey, these are all the things that we noted, and with the exception of the mold, we don't have to fix anything. We're just telling you so that you're not held responsible for these things when you move out. If the tenant wants things fixed, they have to submit that request separately in writing. Okay, the report will be considered correct unless the tenant submits additional items in writing to the landlord within 5 days of receipt of that report. If the tenant doesn't object, then that move-in inspection report that the landlord provided becomes part of the lease process. Okay. Then it goes on to
And I
talk
have
about.
a question, sorry. So I was thinking that the tenant has 5 days to write down and send an email to the landlord if there is something that is wrong on the property. Understand correct or misunderstand?
So the landlord really is supposed to be giving a list at move-in to the tenant of what the landlord thinks is the condition of the property. And then the tenant has 5 days to say, yes, I agree, or no, I disagree.
Oh, okay. So the landlord should give a list. Okay.
Yeah.
And what type of list? Is it an MBR list? Is any list? Is like the same of the walkthrough?
I bet if you wait until we get a little further in class, I'll be able to answer that question.
Sorry.
Shannon, it's
Yes.
5 days from delivery, right? Not necessarily 5 days from move-in. What if they don't deliver it for a few days?
They have 5 days from the lease start date to provide it. The landlord has 5 days from the lease start date to provide it. So if they give it on day 3, then there's 5 days from that for the tenant to respond. All right, so the tenant is responsible for maintaining the premises in a clean and sanitary condition, disposing of all trash and garbage and waste in sealed containers. They are responsible for operating all appliances and equipment in a safe and responsible manner in a way that doesn't overload the systems, right? So, you know, they're not going to be allowed to put the air conditioner down to 50 degrees, you know, in the middle of, you know, that August, right? They have to replace all the light bulbs and fuses as needed and change the furnace air filters at least every 2 months. They are responsible for clearing of all drains and toilets and maintaining the caulk around the bathtubs and showers, and maintenance of all the carpet and flooring in a clean and good condition. If any glass or screens break, they are responsible for payment and replacement. They are responsible for maintaining the premises in a manner to prevent the accumulation of moisture and growth of mold. As soon as they would see that there is any mold, they have to let the landlord know immediately. If they do not, then they are considered negligent, and they might be the ones responsible for the repairs. The tenants also are responsible for the outdoors, right? Cutting and watering, maintaining the lawn and pruning the bushes. They have to remove ice and snow from the sidewalks and steps and driveway, maintain the exterior gutters and drains to make sure that they're, you know, free and clear of leaves and debris. If there's any damage or breakage of anything in the property, they have to make the landlord know immediately, or again, it's negligence. Any cost or service call due to a repeat appointment because the tenant didn't allow access, has to be paid for by the tenant. Repairs, alterations, and additions required by any government authority, the association, insurance company, or managing agent due to the tenant's use is the tenant's responsibility. The tenant is responsible for eliminating household pests, including fleas, ticks, bed bugs, roaches, rodents, etc. So again, like these are all things that I mentioned before, where like in the first 60 days of the lease, things like this might be holdover issues from the previous tenant. So I would talk to your landlords about not charging tenants in that, first 60 days, because that's not right. It's very hard to prove that it would be the tenant's fault that early on. Not displaying signs or advertisements or notices on any part of the premises. You not creating a lien or permitting a lien upon the premises or tenant's interest in the lease. The lease isn't supposed to be recorded by the tenant, like at the courthouse or anything. So those are some things that are the tenant's responsibilities. A holdover tenant is someone who does not vacate at the end of the lease term and doesn't have permission to stay. And it says that the holdover rent is equal to 100% of the per diem for each day they remain in the property. So it can be very expensive.
Shannon, what happens if an agent moves in and he finds all of these issues after he moved in? Can he just break the lease and gets his security deposit?
No, not necessarily. There's 14 to 30 days that a landlord has to rectify things depending on what the issue is. And if it's right away, most of the time the landlords will try to rectify it. And if they can't, a lot of landlords will just let the tenant out of the lease to move out, so then they can take care of it.
Okay.
But it's not an automatic that you can just move out and get your money back.
Okay.
I have a quick question, Shannon. If the landlord gives an order to vacate 72 hours, what happens to the remainder of that lease? Is the tenant responsible for paying that?
No, they're not, because the landlord has ended the lease.
Okay.
And I also would say that for most of this, we as agents are not going to be giving advice to the clients about any of this. We can guide them to where in the lease they should look, and then they should consult with a landlord tenant attorney. Our responsibilities actually end once the lease is signed. We're not even part of the walkthrough process, believe it or not, and the key exchange. Our responsibility as far as the agency relationship ends once the lease is signed.
Okay, gotcha.
That's been a question for me, Shannon, just the walkthrough and the key part. So what in the documents requirements that we submit, the compliance ones, there's a walkthrough one in there. What is that, the one that the landlord has with the tenant that you get back from your tenant client?
Yeah, and the reason that we have it in there is so that we are communicating with our client to make sure our client got it. And then we have a copy of it. So like when they move out and they don't know where it is, they come to us and we're like, oh yeah, we have the copy. Let me send it to you.
Wonderful. I've been doing walkthroughs. All right. So I had that wrong. Good to know. Very good to know.
All right. So the landlord's consent is required for anything structural, any change, painting of the walls, wallpapering, any alteration of the property, installing or attaching like a TV, or installing a satellite dish, swapping out appliances. This says driving nails into the wall. That's not like regular picture hangers and things like that. That would be like, mounting a TV or, something like that. If your tenant wants to rekey the locks, they have to get the landlord's permission because the landlord needs to have access to the property, or if they want to install additional locks. They want to have an iron safe or a waterbed or aquariums, things like that. They need consent. Insurance requirements. So the tenant is going to have renter's insurance. The landlord's going to have, that fire policy, basically. The tenant is going to cover inside the walls and the landlord's going to cover everything out in the structure. Right, if the landlord has to hire an attorney to enforce the lease, the tenant's going to have to pay, right? They're going to have to pay court costs and attorney fees and all of that. If the tenant fails to perform in any of the provisions of the lease, other than failure to pay the rent, the landlord can give notice to the tenant specifying the particular non-compliance, and the landlord can terminate the lease not less than 30 days after the receipt of such notice, unless the tenant remedies for non-compliance within 21 days. Okay, so that's, any of these other things that we've listed here, besides, where we talked about it being, unsafe. Acceptance of rent with reservation. I don't know why this is down here in the lease instead of with the rent payments. But what this means is that you've sent the 14-day notice to pay or quit, and you want to start legal proceedings, you landlord, right? Your landlord wants to start legal proceedings, and the balance due is, let's say, $6,000. And the tenant comes in and says, I have $2,000, I want to make a payment. So the landlord accepts the $2,000. If they don't provide a document that's called the acceptance of rent with reservation notice, then they have to restart everything and deliver a new 14-day notice to pay or quit. And it would have the $4,000, right? But if they provide the rent with reservation letter when they accept the $2,000, what it says, it's very clear. It says, look, we'll take your payment towards what you owe us, but we're not stopping any of the proceedings. So you need to get us payment in full before we stop anything. Okay, so that's the rent with reservation. The redemption right in Virginia, if the tenant has failed to pay rent and it's gone all the way to court, and the court gives judgment to the landlord for possession and money, the tenant has time to bring their account current before the landlord can call the sheriff to have the locks changed. Okay, so they have a redemption period where they can bring the account current. Okay. All right, access to premises. So this changed with COVID for a couple of reasons. People were abusing the COVID situation and saying nobody can come into my house at all. So they weren't allowing showings when the landlord was trying to sell or re-rent. They weren't allowing any inspections or repairs or anything. It was really becoming a problem. So this has been updated to say that the landlord or their designated representative, so that could be property manager or realtor, upon reasonable notification to tenant at reasonable times, may enter the premises to do the following: inspect premises, make necessary or agreed upon repairs, alterations, or improvements, and supply necessary services. Whenever possible, the landlord will arrange for the contracted workers to coordinate with the tenant for the time and date when the premises may be entered to accomplish all of this work. The tenant, it's the tenant's responsibility to ensure that the workers have access to the premises during those times. If the tenant refuses to allow access, the tenant shall bear the additional expense for after-hours fees and overtime incurred by the landlord. Refusal of the tenant to allow access is a breach of the lease. The landlord can take legal action to compel access or may terminate the lease. If there's an emergency where it's impractical for the landlord to give reasonable notification, then the landlord and their designated representative can go in without the consent of the tenant. The for sale or for rent sign can go up, and prospective buyers can be shown within 90 days of the end of the lease and within 60 days for prospective tenants. Now, there can be mutual agreement that it's going to be, longer than that before the lease expires, but this is what it is provided for in the lease. Now, here are the couple of areas where the lease break is provided for. One of them is the transfer of landlord. And this gives the landlord the right to cancel the lease and kick the tenant out. If the landlord resides outside the Washington, D.C. area at the time the lease is entered into, they can be, and they're transferred back during the lease term. The landlord can terminate the lease with 60 days notice, 2 months rent, 2 months notice, basically, okay? Because they are going to occupy this property as their primary residence. Now, I will tell you that they have to be transferred back for employment by the employer that they had when they entered into the lease. Okay, so it says transferred by the landlord's employer or discharged from active duty with the armed forces of the United States or the National Guard. Okay. It is the same concept for the transfer of the tenant. So if the tenant is a member of the armed forces and has received a change in duty station, right? They received orders that are more than 35 miles away, or they are going to be TDY for more than 3 months, they can break their lease. So the date of termination shall not be less than 30 days after the first date in which the next rental payment is due. So it has to be a minimum of 30 days notice, 1 full month of rent. And a termination date shall not be more than 60 days prior to the date of departure necessary. So there's a couple of caveats to make sure that it's not an undue burden on the landlord. Now, if the tenant is being transferred by their employer that they were employed by at the time they filled out the application and the lease was signed, and they were being transferred more than 50 miles from the property, there are 2 options based on how far into the lease they are. Okay, if they have completed fewer than 6 months of the tenancy, it's a fee of 1 month's rent that they have to pay. If they have completed more than 6 months into the tenancy, it's a half of a month's rent, and it's a 2-month notice. Okay, so two calendar months of rent plus either 1 month of a fee or half a month of a fee. And that's only if it's the employer that they were employed by when they applied for the property. Those are the only lease break clauses, not that they want to go buy a house. Landlord's inability to deliver possession to a tenant. So if the landlord has an issue and they can't deliver possession of the property within 15 days after the lease start date, the lease can be terminated by either party. So this has happened actually where like a storm came through right before a lease was supposed to start and a tree fell on a house and they weren't able to get it fixed. And the tenant had to go stay in a hotel and they weren't able to deliver possession. So the tenant was like, I'm sorry, I need a place to live. So the tenant terminated the lease and found another place to live. So it does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. If the landlord, in the event the tenant files bankruptcy, then the lease at the option of the landlord can terminate with 1 month written notice. So the landlord, if they find out that the tenant has filed for bankruptcy, they can terminate the lease. The rest of it's a lot of like legalese that's in here. If the premises is taken in whole or in part by condemnation, the lease will terminate. Death of a tenant or landlord. Okay, so there's a couple of different things here. If the tenant is the only tenant, the sole or all of the tenants die, then the lease is automatically terminated and rent is due to the landlord through the end of the following month. So like from their estate, right? If one of the tenants dies, but the rest of the tenants are still living, the lease may be terminated, giving 60 days written notice. Okay, 90 days if it's a lease term more than 1 year. The death of a landlord, the lease may be terminated by the remaining landlord or the estate of the landlord. Such written notice of termination shall include a copy of the death. The right to terminate the lease must be exercised within 1 month after the landlord's death. So they have to know immediately if they're going to terminate. Now, here's something interesting I will tell you about this, is there are a lot of properties that are owned in trusts. The trust does not qualify here under death of a landlord, because under death, the landlord is the trust. So the trust doesn't die when the person passes away. It's the successor trustee is who handles it. So the lease would still be in full force and effect. All right, the next section talks about if the premises are damaged by fire, the tenant must comply and notify the landlord promptly so that they can make repairs. The parties are notified that there may be commissions due under a separate agreement if the tenant purchases the home from the landlord. On the move-out inspection, the landlord has to give the tenant the option to be present for that move-out inspection. And that has to take place within 72 hours of the tenant's departure. There are a few things that are required for the tenants to do prior to vacating: having carpets cleaned, gutters and chimneys professionally cleaned, having premises treated for fleas and ticks if they had animals, eliminate all pests and vermin, right? Pest control, install clean air filters, and that the fuel tanks are refilled if there are fuel tanks. Ensure that the premises, including kitchens, bathrooms, appliances, floors, walls, windows, are thoroughly cleaned, grass is cut, and trash is removed. So this is a difference from our sale contract, right? The sale contract says free and clear of trash and debris. It doesn't say you have to scrub with chemicals, right? This says you have to use cleaning products and clean everything. So this is when the landlords take for granted that the property is going to be ready for the next tenant to move in. Have all light bulbs, carbon monoxide alarms, smoke alarms in working order, and return all keys, garage door openers, passes, and documents that were provided. Okay. Notices.
Shannon,
How-
if the previous tenant, excuse me, I'm sorry, if the previous tenant doesn't, or the tenant that's leaving doesn't clean it,
Mhm.
is the landlord required to get it cleaned?
So I'm going to say yes, because if the landlord's using this lease and they expect the tenant moving in to leave it cleaned, why wouldn't they provide it cleaned?
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's again, going back to set the expectations that you might need a couple of days in between to make sure that everything's ready. Notices. So this is communication between the landlords and tenants. How are they going to communicate? It's usually electronic. You can check all the boxes if you want, but it's usually electronic. Lead-based paint, was it built before 1978? If so, is there a lead-based paint disclosure attached? Statement of tenant rights and responsibilities. This is new as of 2021, maybe. I don't remember when they added it. Might be 2020. The July updates throw me off. As a result of tenants' non-compliance with or breach of the lease, the landlord might have to employ an attorney. And so the tenant would have to pay the landlord's attorney fees, and vice versa is really what this whole miscellaneous paragraph says. Here are the attachments that could be attached: assistance animal, pet, tenant rights and responsibilities, EPA booklet, lead-based paint disclosure. Diplomats, you have to disclose whether the tenant is a diplomat, because diplomatic immunity makes this lease basically unenforceable. Waiver of trial by jury. Landlord and tenant agree that they are waiving their right to a trial by jury from any issues that arise from this. The landlord and managing agent will not discriminate, right? Again, fair housing, ADA regulations. Statutory notice to tenant. This is Megan's law right here. It's in our agency agreements and it's in the lease. I still see it come through as a separate document. I don't know why, probably because other companies don't read the documents. You don't need it as a separate document because it's in all of our documents. So this is sex offender registry disclosure here. And sex offenders are not a required disclosure. So it's not something that has to be disclosed. Buyers can do their research. Are any of the parties licensed? Yes or no? And brokerage information. So that's the lease itself. And then here are the addendums that could go with it. So I return 50% of the leases that get submitted because they're missing this document. Oh, look, July 1st, 2021. Okay, I was right, 2021. So this is required that the landlords provide this to the tenants with the lease. This does not go with the agency agreements. This is from the landlords with the lease. So it lists what the tenant's rights are, right? Tenants may not, they can be charged a non-refundable application fee, no more than $50. Okay, if there are third-party costs for background checks, that might exceed the $50, but they're going to have to justify that extra cost as a pass-through fee. It talks about security deposits. You know, landlord may not charge more than 2 months rent of a security deposit. So there's certain things that are highlighted in here for the tenants. If something is not fixed, right? So if there's an issue that affects life, health, safety, or seriously affects habitability, and the landlord has not begun to address it within 14 days, there are times that the tenant can hire a licensed contractor if it doesn't cost more than $1,500 or 1 month's rent, whichever is more. And the tenant can deduct the actual cost of the repair from the rent. So I think, Orlando, this might have been your question, that there are times that this can happen where a landlord doesn't do what they're supposed to and the tenant can fix it and deduct from the rent. So this is signed, excuse me, by the landlord, the listing agent, or property manager, and then the tenants. Okay, you as the tenant agent don't have to sign. Now the pet addendum, again, is pretty straightforward. It asks for description of the pet or pets. If there's an additional security deposit, goes here. So the main security deposit is what goes in the lease. So does not include a pet deposit if there's a pet deposit, and then your pet deposit goes here. If there's a pet fee, that does not go here. It's only deposits that go here. Pet fee would be referenced. Really, there shouldn't be a pet fee because that's not what this calls for. But pet fee could be added on an addendum or added somewhere here on this document, but not in the deposit line. Okay, who holds the deposit? The landlord or the property management company. And then it talks about what the tenant's responsibilities are when it comes to having the pet, right? The tenant will remove or secure the pet if the home is on the market, that they are responsible for any additional damage caused by the pet. They may have to deodorize the property because of the pet. Now, if you have an extra addendum that needs to be done for the lease, so this happens sometimes where I'll send a lease back and say, hey, do an addendum for whatever. It just goes on, it looks just like the sale addendum, but it's called addendum dash release. And it references landlord tenant instead of buyer and seller. So this would be where maybe you're extending the lease term, or the seller, the landlord's giving permission for the buyer to paint some rooms and they don't have to be painted back to neutral before the tenant moves out. Anything that is being negotiated can go here on the lease. Note addendum. The notice is unilateral communication from one party to another. So they made one that was a lease notice instead of the sale notice, so that it said landlord and tenant. Now here we have the assistance animal addendum. So if the assistance animal is approved, then this addendum would go with the contract, the lease contract, so that it's clear that there's an assistance animal and it's not a pet. Okay, and it would identify what type of animal it is. Talk about the guidelines for the pet, the landlord or property manager signs, and the tenant signs. Okay. Disclosure of designated and unrepresented parties might apply in a lease, right? So I just included those. Usually unrepresented is going to apply more. Now move in and move out inspection report. We don't have one yet in the NVAR forms library, so I'm going to suggest using this one, which is in the VAR forms library. if you are a listing agent, I'm going to suggest giving this to your landlords. Have them fill it out. You could also give a copy to the tenant so that everybody has a copy to fill in their own information, right? To fill in what they notice when they are walking through, right? Tenants when they move in, landlords when they are doing the walkthrough in between, or the landlords when they're doing the move out inspection when the previous tenant moves out. This is what is the most detailed document that I have access to right now. It's 6 pages. You can always make more notes if you want to, if there's not a lot of space, but this is the best document I have right now. This is meant for the landlord to provide and then give it to the tenant, and the tenant to like check off next to it and say, yes, I agree, I agree, I agree, right? There shouldn't really be discrepancy. And then everybody signs it, right? Tenant signs it, landlord or property manager has signed it first. Okay. Something that I would like to, and then this is again the same document that's used, then you go back and reference this, right? You pull this document then when they move out and you go back and compare. So you've got the same document. So if there was a stain on the carpet in the dining room, it would be noted here, stain in, northwest corner, right, of carpet. So then you know that the stain is there and you're not charging the current tenant. Something that I think is a challenge right now is that we don't facilitate communication between our landlords and our tenants when there's not a property management company involved. So I think that we treat it a little too much like a sale, and we don't want the landlords and tenants to talk to each other, right? We're like, oh, we'll go do the walkthrough with them and we'll do this and we'll take the checks and we'll, after the lease is signed and we're getting them, the landlords and tenants, ready to have a relationship that's going to be for the next year or longer, we need to make sure that they have met each other and that it's a happy meeting and that everybody's going to get along, right? And that the expectations are clear. We need to facilitate that. If it's a property management company that is going to be managing the property for the next year or 2 years or however long, if it's our tenants, we need to make sure that we facilitate that meeting and that we make the tenants feel happy about the property management company, right? So that they understand, hey, these are your advocates, right? Yes, they represent the landlord, but it's your home for the next year. So let's work together, right? Let's set the expectation. So I know I said that your agency relationship ends when the lease is signed, which it does. And from a practical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to be like, okay, I'm out, you're on your own, here's the phone number, right? Have a nice day, because these are people that you want to be your clients later. You want them to give you referrals, you want, and maybe they're your friends already, right? So you can't be like, oh, sorry, I did my job. I'm just going to wait for my commission now. So what can you do? You can set the expectations with them, right? That, okay, now I can't give you advice on too many things, but I can help you, right? I can point you in the right direction. I can come as your friend to the walkthrough, right? But the landlord is going to be there too. Or the property manager is going to be there too. Or this is what's going to happen. You're going to go for the walkthrough and you're going to get keys and you're going to do X, Y, Z. Now, there are some companies out there that are like, hey, stop by my office, drop off a check and pick up the keys and have a nice day, right? So of course you're going to want to go with your clients, right? Because they're not being taken care of by the other side. But if it's being done properly, there's no reason that you can't facilitate that handoff. and say there's no problem, right? When you have gone through the house with them and set the expectations during the showings, and you've communicated with the listing side or the property manager, and everything has been set up in such a way that it's just an easy handoff, it's going to be fine. But I do think that one of the biggest challenges is that we don't facilitate that communication between the landlords and tenants when it's the landlords who are going to be managing their own property. And so then nobody knows, like, you know, the first time the tenant talks to them is when, you know, there's a flood, right? Or when, you know, something breaks. And you guys know, I talk to you guys most of the time if I'm training or if there's a problem. So it's a much harder conversation when there's a problem. I would love to talk to all of you guys when it, you know, when we're just sitting at the lunch table, or, you know, when we're doing something fun. That's way more fun. You guys like me when it's fun, right? But when it's a problem, it's a little, yeah. And that's exactly how the landlords feel. And it's exactly how the tenants feel too, because they're stressed out. They're like, I just want this fixed. So that's my last soapbox moment for the day. It's 2:33. So I'm done. I'm ready for questions and ahas.
Me.
I don't know, Veronica, you might have exceeded your quota for the day.
Please, I have just two. Raise your hand. You know, I do a lot of lease. I like the lease. I like the lease. I like to do rentals. So, yes, I have a question. Two, if it's okay, very quickly. First one, let's say if I represent the tenant, right? And then they sign the lease, everything's fine. How many days before I need to do the walkthrough? If I represent the tenant, how many days before I need to do the walkthrough with the client?
So the walkthrough is going to happen once they get their keys, which will generally be the day the lease goes into
The day
effect.
the lease start. Okay. And then does the tenant agent has to be when you do the walkthrough, or is the listing agent has to be?
Okay, so who wants to answer that question?
Because some people say one thing, the listing agent said no. I know there's a listing agent, but
Shouldn't it be the landlord that does it because it's between, or whoever runs the property or the landlord?
How about both?
Amanda got it right, because Amanda was listening. Veronica, you weren't listening.
no, you told me that it's I know, at least when you say that is after you sign the lease, bye-bye. And I heard that it should be just the landlord and the tenant. But then you said that because you don't want to say bye-bye just to the client, in this case, can I go to, you know, to be nice, it's better if I go, because I have a listing agent that you said to me, no, you know, you don't need to come. I will come directly to do the walkthrough. So
Well, none of the agents need to go, right? That's
Okay.
that's the whole point, is the agents don't need to go. The agents need to facilitate
doing them.
the relationship and the meeting between the landlord and the tenant, or the property management company and the tenant, right? If it's a situation where I won't say names, but I know there are a couple of companies out there that say, stop by my office and pick up the keys.
Right.
And hand me your security deposit and go on your way, right? And it's 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and the keys don't work and the tenant can't get in and it's a big fat mess, right? That's when you can help your tenant and go with them and make sure that everything's okay. But really, the listing agent doesn't need to be there. The tenant agent doesn't need to be there. They need to meet, the clients need to meet each other at that point, right? And do their thing. And if it's managed by a property management company that's doing the right thing, then the property manager or their representative is there meeting the tenant and doing the walkthrough together.
Okay, and then I can recommend my, in this case, if I am the listing agent, I can recommend the landlord to send this document where he can print and do in the same time they do the walkthrough, or it can be sent in 5 days. Do you understand correct?
Okay, so your landlord if you are the listing agent, you are going to give your landlord that document prior to the lease getting started. Your landlord's going to go and walk through by themselves. If you want to
Okay.
go with them, you can. And
Okay,
and everything's going to get marked down about the condition of the property.
okay,
And then a copy of that
okay,
is going to be given to the tenant when they move in.
okay,
So the tenant can go through and say, yes, I agree, or, oh, no, you missed that. I need to add something
okay,
because I don't want to be charged for that. Or, oh, Mr. Landlord, can you fix that? I know you noted that, the toilet was running in the hall bath, but can we fix that?
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. So the landlord's doing it before the tenant moves in.
okay. And the tenant has 5 days in order to agree of this, okay, perfect. Thank you, you're the best.
I have a question. So, yeah, that it is confusing for me, the walkthrough. There's a lot of different layers, and also depending on the property management company who might be just completely hands off, and also with keys, landlords that are not in town. But I love what you said about, facilitating that introduction, that relationship with the landlord and tenant. It's great. I always feel like I'm stepping on the listing agent's toes with their client, though. I mean, what? Because I guess on the lease, I was where I would have that access to the contact details, right? For the, would I have the contact details on the lease for the landlord?
You would, and it's,
Yeah, I would.
it is tricky, right? Because if the listing agent's like, oh, don't worry, I'll be there, then
Mhm.
just say, that's great. Is, the landlord going to be there too? You can go.
Not even for the walkthrough, Shannon, even just the introduction. Like, say I wanted to send an introductory email. Would I send it through the listing agent? I guess I would copy the listing agent, right?
Yeah, well, so your tenant is going to have their contact information also
Sure.
on the lease. It's more of the scheduling the walkthrough, like facilitating that. So if the listing agent's going to be there, then it's okay if the listing agent really wants to be there, right? The listing agent can send the email introducing everybody and copy you on it, right?
Okay.
And vice versa. It really doesn't matter who sends it, as long as everybody is learning to communicate with each other outside of the agents, right?
Yes.
If the listing agent's going to be there and the landlord's not, that's probably when I would say something like, hey, can we make sure that the landlord's going to be there? Or, can the landlord and tenant talk before, or, something like that, right? If it's a situation like that. But I would certainly work through the listing agent to facilitate that, right? I wouldn't go around unless I had to. I would work through them.
Shannon, I have a question. There was a situation where basically during the walkthrough, everything looked fine in the house. When the actual renters got into the house, the bathroom was dirty, and a pendant was missing, was kind of broken. So is it in that case that the rental insurance, I don't know if that has anything to do, the rental insurance for the renters covers anything that there? I mean, how do you handle a situation where at the walkthrough everything is fine, but then when the renter comes in, then something is wrong?
So when you say at the walkthrough, do you mean at the showing?
Both at the showing and no, not at the showing. The final walkthrough, I had a family coming from overseas, and we did a video walkthrough.
On the day the lease started.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a situation where we talked about on the application, you're gonna say that they're applying for the lease to start on a specific day. I think I remember this one. And that you want the walkthrough to occur on a specific date, right? So that they have a certain number of days from the time they take physical occupancy,
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yes, yes, yes.
right?
Yes.
And so that way they're covered, because if something happens when the property is vacant, then the
Yeah.
landlord already knew, and the landlord was responsible for the property while it was vacant, even though they're paying the rent, right? It was agreed upon that the landlord was physically responsible for the property and that the tenant was taking possession on a certain day.
Very clear. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah. And that does happen a lot, right? Where applicants don't want to miss out on a property. And so they say, hey, I'll take it on whatever day you say it's available, but I can't physically be here. So let's work something out. It's super important that a landlord knows if the property is going to be vacant for more than 14 days. They have to let their insurance company know. I know we talked about this in the sales class, right? If you have a vacant property and it goes on the market, because it's a different homeowner's insurance policy when a property is vacant.
I have a question, Shannon.
I do.
Hi. So when the lease ends, and so let's say the lease ends on the November 30th, and both tenant and the landlord agree that tenants move out on the November 30th, but then the tenants say that they need a couple of more days, let's say, to move out. Their truck is late or something, and they have to move out on the December 2nd, let's say. So how do you treat those 2 days?
They would mutually agree to however they want to treat those days. So they could agree to extend the lease term for those couple of days, and that the lease now ends on whatever day, or they could just mutually agree on how they want to handle that. I mean, the lease itself provides for the holdover days to be at 100 at either 100 or 150% per diem based on where what it qualifies under.
But for the holdover, so you would prorate those 2 days and multiply by 100%?
Yeah, it's a per diem. Yes, it's a per day.
Okay.
But the landlord could agree to only charge them whatever their rate was for those days.
Okay, and another question is about the late payment fees. Can they be collected at the end of the lease and deducted from the security deposit?
Yes.
Okay.
They can. I guess to be clear, they would be deducted from the security deposit if they haven't been collected during the lease, right? It's not something that a landlord should say, don't worry about it. I'll just get it from your security deposit in 6 months when you move out. It's something that should be paid when it's due, because it's still accruing, right, as late rent. But if it's not paid and they move out, then it can be applied to the security deposit.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, did anyone learn anything today? It's like an aha.
Always,
Yes, Shannon, as always.
always.
Yeah, that is always something new.
All right,
I
so
agree.
give me
Thank
an
you,
aha.
Shannon.
I want 3 ahas before we go. Tell me something that you learned, something specific you learned today that you didn't know before. Young Turner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on behalf of PPM, I like to say that I learned about the service dog that we didn't know that the person had to be treated by the same doctor or a Virginia doctor, because we had a tenant who said when she moved in, she didn't have a pet. Then all of a sudden her daughter, who had a problem, moved in, and then that daughter had a pet. So nowadays everyone can have a service pet. So that
I
was
didn't know. She got one from New York. is
The
what she
pet-
did.
so the whole
She got
point-
the doctor's note filled out from a person in New York. And I
Yeah.
didn't feel it was legitimate.
So we know now because
Yeah.
people do try to scam you on all kinds of stuff. You know.
They do. And if the daughter had been living in New York and been treated by that doctor for years, then I probably would have said, okay, it's the exception, but yeah, it probably was not the case. So yeah.
I learned the information that goes behind the contract for the tenants, all of those paragraphs. So that was something that I haven't seen before, I think.
Awesome.
So it was very good. And also the pet, the assistant pet. I didn't know there was a different document for that. So that's very good. I think I did learn something new. Thank you, Shannon.
You're very welcome.
I have another
Quite
question.
a few things I learned about the pet, the assistance dogs.
Mhm.
That was the first one. The second one was the prorated amount. That was a moment for me. So thank you, Shannon. Again, as always, your boot camps are, I try not to miss any of them because I learned not one, not two, but many things.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Amanda, you said you have a question still.
I do. Well, I learned a lot. I'm brand new, so I learned a lot, but I do have a question. So for example, if a landlord is doing it themselves, and let's say like so then the client really has no support other than the landlord as in regards to like issues, is there any sort of like reference you can give them, just because we're going through this currently ourselves? And it's like a lemon law. If they had that on houses, that's what this would be. Our kitchen roof fell in the day we moved here. Like it's a whole thing. So I am confident she'll let us out because we have a good relationship. But is there something you can, like, I know it's not our quote problem anymore, but also you want to help people. So is there any kind of support you can give people when they don't have a property management company?
Yeah, so I think that the tenant rights and responsibilities document that is now required is the result of that very situation.
Okay.
So that tenants have somewhere to reference before they hire an attorney to start sending letters. It has references in that document to the statute in Virginia. Parts of the statute are very vague, which drives me nuts. But there are some specific things in there that a landlord, once they see and they hear that there is a remedy that a tenant's offering, like, hey, just let me go, right? Just let me go and you can deal with whatever you have to deal with. They do just let the tenant go. They're also, depending on the county or jurisdiction that the property is in, sometimes there are advocates within the county that can help. But I would say read over that tenant rights and responsibilities document and maybe just go to some of those links that are in there, just for your own knowledge.
Right. Okay. Thank
As a landlord, I can say I learned a heck of a lot today. Things I've been doing wrong. So yeah, I picked up on a lot of things that I could use.
Well, good. I'm glad. And you know what? And I bet as a landlord, the things that you were doing wrong were things that you weren't intentionally trying to do wrong. It was things that you had always done, so you always did, right?
Right.
And because no one brought it to your attention that, hey, this changed or that changed, you
Right.
just didn't know to change.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a standard, a uniform form. I got one offline, a lease agreement offline. I've been using it.
Yeah, well, then see, and now you've got all kinds of good documents to use.
Right, exactly.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad this was a good use of your time today.
It was.
Shannon, a person who is not a realtor, like for example, my son, he doesn't have to know what the realtors do, right?
Right, he doesn't have to know what the realtors do, but the VRLTA rules are still in effect. So everyone is still bound by the
By
landlord.
the rules,
Yes.
the landlord rules that he has to comply. Oh, okay, thank you so much.
You're
The
welcome.
rights and responsibilities, right?
Yes, yeah, the Virginia, the Landlord Tenant Act. Gina, I think you are next.
I cannot find the one, is the name of the document, Virginia one-time showing agreement? I can't find the document and I'm getting really annoyed.
It's in the Virginia Association of Realtors folder.
Okay, and that's the name of it. So if I
And it's
search,
called the one-time showing.
okay, so it will show up that way. Okay, thank you.
Oh, and so if you have a rental, and you need a one-time showing agreement, if it's a for rent by owner, just as an aside, let me know. I have a document for that, because I copied and pasted the sale one and made it appropriate to rentals. It doesn't happen as often, but I do have a rental one if anyone ever needs it. All right. Any last questions?
That was really good, Shannon. So good. Thank you, as usual.
Thank you, guys.
And real quick, Mr. Edwards, if you need some property management, you know, we got you over here.
We might be able to work something out.
Yes, I like the $200. I like it.
Yes, we got
Yeah.
some.
We like the bonus.
I didn't know you worked down there, Young.
You gotta go to the office and go downstairs a little more.
Yeah, but I didn't know that you worked down in the PPM.
Oh, yeah, I'm a part-time employee and a full-time realtor.
All right, nothing wrong with
Young,
that.
Young, if you could send me the link, I appreciate.
Okay.
Yes, there you go. And-
Layla,
Yeah, and Young and Layla, stay on with me for a minute. Don't go anywhere. The rest of you can go have a wonderful day. Thank you
Shannon.
all so much for being here, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shannon.
Shannon.
bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, guys.